A gunshot shattered the midnight silence. Abigail Morgan crumpled to the cabin floor, her tall frame folding like paper as she clutched 6-year-old Jacob tightly against her chest. Blood seeped through her nightgown where the bullet had grazed her shoulder. Through a curtain of fiery red hair, she stared up at the man standing over her, Daniel Blackwood, her husband of 8 years, his eyes cold as Montana stone. "Don't touch him," she whispered, pressing Jacob's face into her shoulder to shield him from the sight of his father's rage. Daniel's laugh was brittle in the dim lamplight. "You think you can run from me? Take what's mine." He lowered the gun until it pointed directly at Jacob's small back. "This is what happens when you try to leave Abby." Her voice turned to steel. "I'll kill you before I let you hurt him." Daniel's face twisted with amusement. "You, the witch of Hollow Creek." He kicked her injured shoulder, making her gasp. "You're nothing but a—" The second gunshot was louder than the first. 1 month later, the crowd gathered around the iron cage in Granite Falls Town Square, like vultures circling prey. Children pushed to the front, their eager faces pressed between thick metal bars. A woman in rags huddled at the far corner of the cage, knees drawn to her chest, a curtain of matted red hair hiding her face. "Throw something at the witch," a boy shouted, hefting a stone. Sheriff Wilson snatched it from his hand. "That'll be enough, Tommy Lewis. Your 2 cents buys you a look, not target practice." He pocketed the stone along with the boy's coins, then turned to the gathering crowd with the practiced smile of a circus barker. "Step right up, folks. See the Red Devil of Granite Falls, the witch who murdered 3 men with her bare hands and sacrificed her own child to the mountain spirits." Inside the cage, Abigail Morgan didn't move. She learned that stillness was safer than protest. The October wind cut through her threadbare dress, but the cold had long since numbed her body, just as the weeks of captivity had numbed her spirit. A tall figure pushed through the crowd, different from the usual gawkers. He wore a trail-worn duster and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low, but his posture was military straight. When he reached the front, he stopped saying nothing, just studying the woman in the cage. Abigail felt his gaze and slowly raised her head. Their eyes met moss green against stormy blue, and for a moment the world around them stilled. Sheriff Wilson sidled up beside the stranger. "2 cents for a look, mister. Extra if you want to hear her curse." The man continued staring, recognition flickering in his eyes. "I've seen enough," he said, finally turning to the sheriff. "Where's Judge Holloway?" "The courthouse, but he don't take visitors without—" "He'll see me." The stranger dropped a coin in the sheriff's palm and strode away, leaving whispers in his wake. Abigail watched him go, something stirring in her deadened heart. Not hope she'd abandoned that weeks ago, but curiosity. In this town where every face had become a mask of hatred or fear, his had shown something different, purpose. Judge Archibald Holloway's office reeked of tobacco and self-importance. Behind a desk cluttered with papers and half-empty whiskey glasses sat a corpulent man whose expensive suit strained against his girth. He didn't stand when the stranger entered, merely raising bushy eyebrows in irritation. "Who the devil are you to barge in here unannounced?" The stranger removed his hat, revealing a weathered face with a neat beard streaked with gray and a scar running from temple to jaw. "Emmett Walsh, Special Investigator, Pinkerton Agency." The judge's expression shifted from annoyance to caution. "Pinkerton, what business brings you to our humble Granite Falls?" Emmett placed a folded paper on the desk. "I'm tracking a fugitive, Warsham, Travis Reeves, wanted for murder in Missouri." He paused, watching the judge's face. "But I've found something else of interest. The woman in the cage." Holloway's fingers drummed against the desk. "Abigail Morgan, what about her? I want to buy her." The judge barked a laugh. "She's not for sale. She's sentenced to public display as punishment for 3 murders and witchcraft, so I heard." Emmett's voice remained level. "I also heard there's an old territorial law that allows a condemned woman to be released into a husband's custody." Holloway's eyes narrowed. "You want to marry the witch?" "I want to fulfill an old debt." A calculated pause, then, "It would cost you." "I figured as much." Emmett reached inside his coat and placed a leather pouch on the desk. The clinking sound when it landed made the judge's eyes widen. $500, plus a legal agreement. Holloway opened the pouch, fingering the gold coins. "What sort of agreement?" "If she harms anyone, we both hang." Emmett's expression remained impassive. "A guarantee for the town's peace of mind." The judge stroked his beard, greed battling suspicion. "Why would you risk your neck for a murderous witch?" "My reasons are my own." A tense silence stretched between them before Holloway reached for pen and paper. "500 now," he said, scribbling, "and another 500 when you leave town with her." Emmett nodded once. "We'll need a preacher. Reverend Caldwell won't like it." "I don't need him to like it, just to make it legal." Word spread through Granite Falls like wildfire. By sundown, a crowd had gathered outside the small, whitewashed church on Pine Street. They muttered and jostled, hungry for spectacle. Inside, Reverend Caldwell stood rigid behind the pulpit, his thin face pinched with disgust. Sheriff Wilson had brought Abigail from her cage, her wrists still shackled. She stood swaying, slightly weakened by weeks of exposure and meager rations. Her once vibrant red hair hung limp around her hollow face. Emmett Walsh waited at the altar, hat in hand. His eyes never left Abigail as she was half dragged up the aisle. "This is blasphemy," Caldwell hissed when they reached him. "This woman is an instrument of Satan." "Just say the words, Reverend," Judge Holloway commanded from the front pew. "The law's the law." The ceremony, if it could be called that, lasted less than 2 minutes. Caldwell sped through the vows, his voice dripping with contempt. Emmett responded clearly. Abigail remained silent until the sheriff nudged her roughly. "I do," she whispered the first words Emmett had heard her speak. No rings were exchanged, no kiss sealed the union. Only Judge Holloway's signature on a document made it official. Abigail Morgan, now Abigail Walsh, released into her husband's custody. "Remember our agreement?" Holloway warned Emmett as they left the church. "She causes trouble both your next stretch." Outside, the crowd had grown larger, angrier. A woman spat at Abigail's feet. Someone threw a clod of dirt that hit her shoulder. "Witch, devil's whore, child killer." Emmett stepped between Abigail and the mob. "Anyone else who touches my wife answers to me," he said, voice cutting through the noise. His hand rested meaningfully on the revolver at his hip. The crowd fell back, but their hatred remained palpable as Emmett led Abigail to where his horse and wagon waited. He helped her onto the wooden bench, noticing how she flinched at his touch. "Where are you taking me?" she asked, her voice rough from disuse. "Home," he answered, simply climbing up beside her. "Stone Valley, about a day's ride east." She said nothing more as he flicked the reins and the wagon lurched forward, leaving Granite Falls and its judgment behind. But as the town disappeared around a bend, Emmett saw her shoulders begin to tremble, though no sound escaped her lips. They traveled through the night, stopping only to rest the horse. Emmett offered food, jerky, and hardtack from his saddlebag, but Abigail barely ate. She sat rigid beside him, eyes fixed on the dark road ahead, lost in thoughts he couldn't fathom. Dawn broke over the mountains as they crested a ridge. Below them stretched Stone Valley, named for the strange rock formations that jutted from its eastern edge like petrified giants. A small cabin nestled against pine trees in the valley's heart-thin smoke rising from its chimney. "My place," Emmett said, nodding toward it. "Not much, but it's quiet. Private." Abigail studied the isolated homestead, her face unreadable. "Why are you doing this?" Instead of answering, he guided the wagon down the winding trail to the valley floor. As they approached the cabin, she noticed a smaller structure behind it, a workshop or storage shed, and a corral with 2 horses grazing peacefully. The cabin door opened as they pulled up, and an elderly Native American woman emerged, her silver-streaked hair braided down her back. She nodded to Emmett and cast curious eyes on Abigail. "Morning, Martha," Emmett called. "This is Abigail. She'll be staying." Martha's weathered face remained expressionless, but she dipped out her head in acknowledgement before returning inside. "Housekeeper," Emmett explained as he helped Abigail down. "Comes by twice a week. Doesn't speak much English, but she's trustworthy." The cabin interior was simple but surprisingly clean. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, a rough-hewn table and chairs occupied the center, and a narrow bed stood in one corner. Books lined shelves along another wall, more than Abigail would have expected in a frontier cabin. "You'll take the bed," Emmett said, setting down her meager belongings, just a small cloth bundle the sheriff had allowed her to keep. "I'll sleep in the workshop." Abigail stood in the center of the room, arms wrapped around herself. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing. Everyone wants something." Emmett sighed, removing his hat and coat. "Right now, I want to clean up and eat. You're welcome to do the same." He pointed to a screen in the corner. "There's a wash basin behind there. Fresh clothes in the trunk beside the bed. They'll be too big, but they're clean." "I'll be outside, seeing to the horses." When he returned 30 minutes later, Abigail had washed the worst of the grime from her face and hands. She'd changed into one of his shirts, the sleeves rolled up multiple times, and a pair of trousers cinched tight with rope. Even in ill-fitting clothes, she cut an impressive figure, tall and straight-backed, despite her ordeal. Martha had left a pot of stew warming over the fire. Emmett ladled portions into 2 bowls and set them on the table. "Eat," he said, "then rest. We can talk later." They ate in silence. When finished, Emmett took the bowls outside to wash. Upon returning, he found Abigail standing by the window, staring at the mountains as the evening shadows lengthened across the valley. Without turning, she spoke. "I didn't kill my son." Her voice was so quiet he almost missed it. "I know," he replied. Now she did turn, surprise flashing across her face. "How could you possibly—" "Get some sleep, Mrs. Walsh," he cut her off gently. "You're safe here. That's all that matters tonight. He left her standing there, confusion replacing the emptiness in her eyes for the first time since he'd found her in that cage. Squaw. Emmett Walsh couldn't sleep. He lay on his cot in the workshop, listening to the night sounds of the valley, the hoot of an owl, the distant howl of a wolf, the whisper of wind through pine needles. His mind kept returning to the woman in his cabin. Abigail Morgan, no Walsh now, his wife in name only. 15 years had passed since he'd last seen her, yet he'd recognized those green eyes immediately. She'd been younger then, of course. A volunteer nurse during the war, tending to broken men with steady hands and quiet determination. She'd saved his life at Shiloh when a Confederate bullet tore through his shoulder and doctors had been too overwhelmed to notice him bleeding out. She wouldn't remember him. He'd been just one of hundreds she'd treated delirious with fever, his face bandaged from another wound. But he remembered her, the focused calm in her eyes as she worked, the gentle Scottish lilt in her voice as she spoke to him through the worst nights. He'd never expected to find her again, certainly not in a cage like a wild animal. Sighing, Emmett rose and pulled on his boots. Sleep would not come tonight. He stepped outside intending to check the horses when a movement near the cabin caught his eye. Abigail stood on the porch, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, her face tilted up to the star-filled sky. Moonlight gleamed in her hair, restoring some of its fiery color. She looked, not peaceful exactly, but less haunted than before. He remained still, not wanting to disturb her private moment. Then he noticed what she held clutched in one hand, a small piece of cloth, perhaps a handkerchief, that she pressed briefly to her lips before tucking it inside her shirt. Something about the gesture, so intimate, so full of hidden grief, made him turn away. Whatever ghosts Abigail Walsh carried, she deserved to face them without his witness. Days passed in an uneasy rhythm. Abigail slept much of the first 2 days, her body reclaiming the rest it had been denied in captivity. When awake, she moved about the cabin like a wraith, speaking little, eating sparingly, despite Emmett's encouragement. On the third day, Emmett returned from hunting to find the cabin floor swept, the hearth cleared, and Abigail attempting to mend a tear in one of his shirts. Her stitches were neat, her focus intense. "You don't need to do that," he said, setting down 2 rabbits he'd caught. She didn't look up. "I need to do something." He understood. Idle hands left too much room for memories. By the end of the first week, they'd established a fragile routine. Emmett hunted or worked with his horses. Abigail kept to the cabin, gradually taking over cooking and mending. They existed together, yet separate, connected by circumstance, but divided by unasked questions. At night, Emmett sometimes heard her crying muffled sobs she tried to silence with a pillow. Once he heard her whisper a name, Jacob. Her son, he presumed. The boy she was accused of killing. On the 8th day, everything changed. Emmett had ridden to a nearby creek to check his fishing lines. Returning mid-afternoon, he found Abigail outside splitting wood with his axe. Her strokes were powerful, her technique surprisingly skilled. Sweat dampened her hair despite the autumn chill. She looked up as he approached, momentarily startled, then resumed her work. The woodpile was low. He dismounted, watching her swing the axe with practiced ease. "Where'd you learn to split wood like that?" "My father's farm. Before..." She let the sentence trail off, embedding the axe in the chopping block. "Before Daniel Blackwood." Her head snapped up, eyes suddenly wary. "You know my husband's name." "I know many things about you, Abigail Morgan." "Walsh," she corrected automatically, then frowned. "Who are you really? Why did you bring me here?" Emmett hesitated, then gestured toward the cabin porch. "Let's sit." They settled on the rough-hewn steps, a careful distance between them. Emmett removed his hat, running a hand through graying hair as he considered his words. "I'm not just a Pinkerton agent," he began. "That's true enough, but not the whole truth. I'm investigating a network of criminals operating throughout the territory. Men who traffic in stolen goods, land fraud, and worse." He paused, watching her reaction. "And sometimes trafficking in people, especially children." Abigail's face drained of color. "Jacob," she whispered, "I believe your husband was connected to this network, and I believe your son may still be alive." She grabbed his arm, fingers digging in with desperate strength. Don't say that unless you're certain." "I'm not certain," he admitted, "but there are patterns. Children reported dead who later surface hundreds of miles away. And Daniel Blackwood had connections to people I've been tracking." Abigail released him and stood abruptly, pacing the yard with agitated steps. "I saw him shoot Jacob. I saw the blood." Her voice broke. "I buried my baby on the mountainside." "Did you?" Emmett asked quietly. "Or did Daniel take him away while you were unconscious from your own wounds?" She stopped, trembling. "How could you possibly know about that night?" "Because I've been following Daniel Blackwood's associates for months. Because when news spread about the witch who killed her husband and 2 other men, I recognized the description." He stood, approaching her carefully. And because I owe you a debt, Abigail, from a long time ago. Confusion crossed her face. We've never met. We have, though you wouldn't remember me. He touched the scar on his face. I looked different then. It was during the war. Battle of Shiloh. You were a nurse. Recognition dawned slowly in her eyes. The soldier with the shoulder wound, the one who kept reciting poetry during his fever. Emmett smiled faintly. Tennyson, you said it was better than most men screaming. You lived. It wasn't a question but a realization. So many didn't. Because of you. He met her gaze steadily. You saved my life. Now I'm trying to return the favor. Abigail turned away, processing this revelation. When she spoke again, her voice was stronger. If there's even a chance Jacob is alive. She faced Emmett, something fierce replacing the emptiness in her eyes. Tell me everything. That evening they talked until the fire burned low. Emmett explained his investigation, how he'd been tracking a criminal organization that operated behind legitimate businesses across the territory, how children sometimes disappeared from communities after these men passed through, how he'd followed a trail that led to Daniel Blackwood and his associates. The two men you killed alongside Daniel, Emmett said, Wesley Thompson and George Harker. Both had connections to Judge Holloway and Reverend Caldwell. Abigail sat rigid in her chair, hands clenched in her lap. Wesley was Daniel's business partner. George worked for them both. They were there that night. Her voice faltered. When Daniel shot Jacob, when I took the knife, self-defense, Emmett stated firmly. She looked up, eyes haunted. Does it matter I still killed 3 men? It matters to me, Emmett leaned forward. Now tell me about Jacob. Everything you remember from that night. Abigail closed her eyes, pain etching deeper lines in her face. We were trying to escape. Daniel had been different, violent in new ways, secret meetings, strange men visiting the house. She drew a shaky breath. I found money hidden in his study, more money than a store clerk should have, in a child's shoe with blood on it. Emmett's jaw tightened. I knew then we had to leave. I packed what I could while Daniel was in town. But he came home early with Wesley and George. They'd been drinking. Her hands began to tremble. Daniel had his gun, said he knew what I'd found, said I should have minded my own business. She paused, struggling for control. Jacob ran to me. Daniel fired. I saw Jacob fall, saw the blood on his nightshirt. I screamed. Daniel hit me with the gun. Everything went dark. Her voice dropped to a whisper. When I woke, they were discussing what to do with me. Daniel said they should just kill me, make it look like I'd run off. Wesley said no too suspicious after what happened to the Miller girl last month. Emmett leaned closer. What Miller girl? I don't know, but that's when I saw the knife on the floor beside me. I just reacted. She looked down at her hands as if seeing blood there still. Daniel died first, then Wesley when he tried to grab me. George made it to the door before I caught him. And Jacob, his body. Gone, Daniel said they'd buried him already. A tear slid down her cheek. I ran to the hillside behind our house, found freshly turned earth, a small grave. Her voice broke. I sat there all night. That's where the sheriff found me in the morning, covered in blood, talking to my son's grave. They said I'd sacrificed him in a witch's ritual. Silence filled the cabin as Emmett absorbed her story. Finally, he spoke. I don't think that grave held your son, Abigail. Hope and terror warred in her expression. What makes you so sure? Because it fits the pattern. Because Daniel wanted you silenced but kept alive to take the blame. Because dead children don't need shoes. He stood moving to a chest in the corner. From it, he removed a leather portfolio and brought it to the table. And because of this, he opened the portfolio, revealing a map and several sketches. One showed a man's face, middle-aged, with a distinctive scar across his nose. Sebastian Gray, Emmett explained. He moves through the territory recruiting men like Daniel for his operation. They identify vulnerable families, especially those with children. Sometimes they take the children directly. Sometimes they stage deaths. Abigail stared at the sketch, recognition flickering in her eyes. He came to our house 3 months ago. Daniel called him Mr. Smith. Emmett nodded grimly. Gray's been spotted near Red Snake Gorge, about 2 days' ride from here. My informants say there's some kind of holding facility there where they keep the children before moving them east. East for what purpose? Factories, mines, wealthy families wanting servants, or worse. Emmett's face darkened. The younger ones fetch the highest prices. Abigail pressed a hand to her mouth, nausea evident in her expression. After a moment, she composed herself. If Jacob is alive, if he's at this place, then we'll find him, Emmett finished. But not tonight, not until we're prepared. She nodded, exhaustion suddenly evident in the slump of her shoulders. Why are you telling me all this? You could have kept me in the dark, used me for your investigation without giving me hope that might prove false. Emmett considered the question. Because you deserve the trial, however painful, and because I need your help. He tapped the map. You know Daniel's operations better than anyone. You might recognize names, places, connections I've missed. And if we find nothing, if Jacob truly is dead, then at least you'll know for certain. He closed the portfolio. Get some rest. Tomorrow we start planning. As Abigail rose to go to bed, Emmett stopped her with one more question. The townsfolk called you a witch. Why? A bitter smile touched her lips. Because I learned medicine from my Scottish grandmother. Because I could ease pain with herbs when doctors failed. Because I delivered babies that lived when the midwife said they wouldn't, she shrugged. Women with knowledge are dangerous, Mr. Walsh. Surely you know that. Emmett, he corrected. If we're legally married, you might as well use my name. She nodded slowly. Good night, Emmett. Good night, Abigail. After she'd gone behind the privacy screen, Emmett remained at the table staring into the dying fire. He hadn't told her everything, like how close Sebastian Gray's men might be already, or how Judge Holloway had sent a telegram to the territorial marshal about the escaped witch. Troubles that would find them soon enough. For tonight, he'd given her something she'd lacked for too long hope. Whether that was kindness or cruelty remained to be seen. A storm rolled through Stone Valley that night, bringing slashing rain and wind that howled through the pines like lost souls. Abigail lay awake listening to the tempest, her mind racing with Emmett's revelations. Jacob alive. The possibility both exhilarated and terrified her. What if Emmett was wrong? What if this was an elaborate deception for purposes she couldn't fathom? What if Jacob truly lay in that small grave on the mountainside, or worse, what if he was alive but suffering her sweet boy with his father's dark hair and her green eyes? 6 years old and already so curious about the world. He'd collected leaves and rocks, named the chickens in their yard, asked endless questions about the stars. Would he even remember her now? A particularly violent gust rattled the cabin windows. In the brief silence that followed, Abigail heard a sound that didn't belong to the storm. A small, sharp cry from outside. She sat up, straining to hear. There it came again, barely audible above the rain, a child's voice. Grabbing Emmett's coat from the hook by the door, she threw it over her nightdress and stepped onto the porch. Rain immediately soaked her, plastering her hair to her face as she peered into the darkness. Hello, she called. Is someone there? Nothing but the storm answered. She was about to retreat when a flash of lightning illuminated a small figure staggering up the path from the valley floor, a child soaked and limping. Without hesitation, Abigail ran into the rain. The child collapsed just as she reached him, a boy, perhaps 10 years old, his clothes torn, his face bruised. Jacob, she whispered, hope surging irrationally. But when she turned him over, an unfamiliar face gazed up at her, thin, frightened, with a distinctive birthmark across one cheek. Help, the boy croaked before his eyes rolled back. Abigail lifted him easily, her tall frame and farm-strengthened muscles making the burden light. She carried him toward the cabin, calling for Emmett as she ran. The workshop door flung open. Emmett emerged with a lantern and his revolver, instantly alert, despite being roused from sleep. A boy, Abigail explained as they hurried inside, injured. He collapsed on the path. They laid the child on Emmett's bed. In the lamplight, they could see his dire condition, soaked to the bone, feverish with cuts and bruises covering his arms and face. His clothes were rags, his feet bare and bloodied. Fetch my medical bag from the trunk, Emmett instructed, already working to remove the boy's wet clothes. And water, both cold and hot. Abigail moved quickly, falling into the familiar rhythm of tending the sick. As a nurse during the war, she'd treated far worse injuries than these, but seeing them on a child twisted something deep inside her. Working together, they cleaned and bandaged the boy's wounds. Emmett's hands were surprisingly gentle, his knowledge of medicine more extensive than Abigail would have expected from a Pinkerton agent. You have medical training, she observed as they worked. Army surgeon before Pinkerton recruited me. He pressed a cool cloth to the boy's forehead, though nothing like your skill with herbs. The compliment surprised her, but she said nothing, focusing instead on the child. Once they'd treated his immediate injuries, they dressed him in one of Emmett's shirts, comically large on his small frame, and tucked him into the warm bed. Will he live? Abigail asked, brushing damp hair from the boy's forehead. If the fever breaks by morning, yes. Emmett studied the child's face. Do you recognize him? She shook her head. Not from Granite Falls, but these marks. She gently traced a ring of bruises around the boy's wrist. These are from restraints. He was bound. Emmett's expression darkened, and recently escaped, judging by those feet. He moved to the window, peering out at the storm last night, which means whoever had him might be looking. A chill that had nothing to do with the rain ran through Abigail. You think he's one of them? One of the stolen children? It seems likely. Emmett checked his revolver, then reached for his rifle leaning against the wall. I'll keep watch. You stay with the boy. If he wakes, try to learn what you can. As Emmett moved toward the door, Abigail caught his arm. If they come for him, they won't take him, Emmett promised, his eyes hard in the lamplight. Or you. After he'd gone, Abigail settled into a chair beside the bed, her gaze fixed on the child's feverish face. She hummed softly an old Scottish lullaby her grandmother had taught her, the same one she'd sung to Jacob every night since his birth. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the cabin, watching this unknown boy fight for life, Abigail felt something stir within her that she'd thought dead and buried, a fierce protective instinct that had once belonged only to her son. If Jacob was alive, if he was suffering as this child had suffered, heaven help those who stood between her and her boy. Dawn broke clear and cold after the storm. Abigail had dozed in her chair, waking every time the boy stirred or moaned. His fever had peaked around midnight, then gradually subsided. Now he slept more peacefully, his breathing even. Emmett entered quietly, his clothes damp from the morning dew. He'd spent the night alternating between the porch and perimeter checks around the property. Any sign of pursuit? Abigail asked softly. He shook his head. Nothing, but they'll come eventually. He nodded toward the sleeping child. How is he? Fever's broken. He's young and strong, he'll recover. She stretched working stiffness from her shoulders. You should rest. I'll keep watch. Emmett looked about to refuse, then nodded. Wake me if he stirs. He settled into the chair, she vacated rifle across his knees. Abigail moved to the hearth to stir the fire back to life, then began preparing a simple broth. The familiar task centered her, giving her hands purpose, while her mind worked through all she'd learned. She was so absorbed that she didn't notice the boy had awakened until a small voice spoke from the bed. Are you an angel? She turned to find him watching her with wide brown eyes, fever bright but lucid. No, child, just a woman. She approached slowly, not wanting to frighten him. My name is Abigail. What's yours? He hesitated, glancing at the still sleeping Emmett. That's Emmett, she explained. He's my husband. We found you in the storm last night. You're safe here. The boy's eyes filled with tears. Samuel, he whispered. My name is Samuel. Hello, Samuel. She sat gently on the edge of the bed. You're very brave to have made it all the way here in such weather. Where did you come from? Fear flashed across his face. The bad place, with the men in masks. Abigail's heart quickened, but she kept her voice calm. What men in masks, Samuel? The ones who take children. His voice dropped to a terrified whisper. To the canyon. To Red Snake Gorge. Emmett's eyes opened instantly, alert, though he remained motionless. How did you escape? Abigail asked. Through the hole. In the back wall. I'm small. Pride briefly overcame fear in Samuel's expression. I waited for the storm, so they couldn't hear me, so the dogs couldn't smell me. Were there other children there at this place? Samuel nodded, tears spilling over. Lots, boys and girls, some babies. He grabbed Abigail's hand suddenly. Jacob said you'd help us. The name struck her like a physical blow. Jacob, she breathed. Jacob Morgan. The boy nodded. He told me stories about his mama with red hair who could heal people. Said she'd come for us someday. His face crumpled. But they took him away. 2 days ago. Said he was being sent east. Abigail couldn't speak. Emmett moved to her side, his hand on her shoulder, offering silent support. Samuel, he said gently, this Jacob, can you describe him? Dark hair, green eyes like hers. Samuel pointed at Abigail. He had a scar on his chin, from falling out of an apple tree, he said. A strangled sound escaped Abigail's throat. The scar Jacob had gotten it 3 months before that fateful night, exactly as Samuel described. He's alive, she whispered out, turning to Emmett with wild hope in her eyes. My son is alive. Emmett squeezed her shoulder, his face grave despite the confirmation. And in terrible danger if they're moving him east. Samuel's eyes darted between them, suddenly fearful again. Are you sending me back? No, Abigail said fiercely, taking the boy's hands in hers. Never. You're safe with us now, and you're going to help us find Jacob and the others. Emmett crouched beside the bed, his voice gentle but serious. Samuel, I need you to tell us everything you can about this place. How many men guard it? How many children? The layout. Everything you remember. As Samuel began to speak, Abigail felt the world shifting around her. Her son, her Jacob, was alive. The knowledge filled her with equal measures of joy and terror. Joy that he hadn't died that night in their cabin. Terror at what he might have endured since. One thing was certain, nothing would stop her from finding him now. Not Judge Holloway, not the men in masks, not the law that had branded her a witch and a murderer. For the first time since that gunshot had shattered her world, Abigail Morgan Walsh had a purpose beyond mere survival. And God help anyone who stood in her way. By midday, they had learned all they could from Samuel. The boy's account painted a grim picture, a hidden compound in Red Snake Gorge where at least 20 children were held in deplorable conditions. Guards with distinctive snake tattoos on their wrists, a man called the Doctor who examined new arrivals and decided their fate, and Jacob Brave, defiant. Jacob, who had protected younger children, told them stories and given Samuel the courage to escape when the opportunity arose. He made me promise to find help, Samuel explained, his small hands clutching the mug of broth Abigail had given him. Said to look for a cabin in Stone Valley where a tall woman with red hair might be. Emmett exchanged a meaningful look with Abigail. How did Jacob know to send him here? I don't know, Abigail admitted. We never lived in Stone Valley, but I used to tell him stories about a magical valley with stone giants who protected children. Her eyes widened with sudden understanding. The rock formations on the eastern ridge. They're visible for miles. Jacob remembered my stories and saw them. Smart boy, Emmett murmured. Samuel yawned, exhaustion overtaking him again, despite his desire to help. Abigail tucked him back into bed, promising to wake him for supper. Within moments, he was asleep. She joined Emmett at the table where he'd spread out his maps. Red Snake Gorge is here, he said, pointing to a winding canyon about 30 miles northeast. Isolated, difficult terrain, limited approaches. His finger traced potential routes. If Samuel's account is accurate, we're looking at least 8 armed men. Against the 2 of us, Abigail stated flatly. Emmett met her gaze. I have colleagues, other Pinkerton agents working this case. The nearest is in Helena, about a week's ride. He shook his head. But if they're moving children east already, we don't have a week. Then we go ourselves. Abigail's voice brooked no argument. Tonight. And that would be suicide, and you know it. Emmett's tone remained level. We need a plan, resources, information beyond what a terrified 10-year-old could provide. Before Abigail could respond, a sound outside froze them both, approaching hoofbeats, multiple riders. Emmett moved to the window, peering through a gap in the curtains. 3 men, he reported tersely. Armed. Abigail's hand went to her throat. Looking for Samuel. Maybe. Emmett grabbed his revolver and handed Abigail a shotgun from above the mantel. Take Samuel to the root cellar. There's a trap door under the rug by the pantry. Stay there until I call for you. And if you don't call, the question hung between them, heavy with implication. Then wait until dark and take the north trail out of the valley. Martha's people have a camp in the high country. They'll help you. He checked his weapon one last time. Now go. Abigail hesitated only a moment before gathering the sleeping Samuel in her arms. She paused at the trap door, looking back at Emmett. Be careful. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Always am. The root cellar was cool and dark, smelling of earth and stored vegetables. Abigail settled Samuel on a pile of empty sacks, pressing a finger to her lips when he stirred. Above them, she heard Emmett open the cabin door, his voice carrying faintly through the floorboards. Afternoon, gentlemen. What brings you to Stone Valley? A deeper voice responded, words indistinct but tone hostile. More voices joined in. The conversation continued for several minutes, tension evident even through the barrier between them. Then came the sound. Abigail dreaded a gunshot, followed by the crash of breaking furniture. Samuel jerked awake, eyes wide with terror. Abigail pulled him close, one hand covering his mouth to stifle any sound. More gunshots followed, then heavy footsteps crossing the cabin floor directly above their hiding place. Check everywhere, a voice commanded. The boy has to be here somewhere. Drawers opened and closed, furniture scraped across floorboards. Abigail's grip tightened on the shotgun, her body tense as a bowstring as footsteps approached the pantry. A floorboard creaked directly overhead. Samuel trembled against her, tears streaming silently down his face. Abigail's finger moved to the shotgun's trigger, ready to fire the moment the trapdoor opened. Instead, a new voice called from outside. Riders coming, at least 4 from the south. The footsteps retreated. A hurried conversation followed, then the sound of men leaving the cabin. Horses galloped away, fading into distance. Abigail counted to 100 before daring to move. Gently setting Samuel aside, she positioned herself beneath a trapdoor, shotgun ready. Stay here, she whispered, no matter what you hear. She pushed the trapdoor open, slowly prepared for an ambush. The cabin was empty, though signs of struggle were everywhere. Overturned furniture, a broken window, a splash of blood on the floorboards. Emmett, she called softly, emerging from the cellar. No answer. Heart pounding, Abigail moved cautiously through the cabin and onto the porch. The yard was empty, the horses in the corral undisturbed. Of Emmett and the intruders, there was no sign. She was about to call again when movement at the edge of the trees caught her eye, a figure staggering toward the cabin clutching his side. Emmett. Abigail ran to him, catching him as he stumbled. Blood soaked his shirt, and a bruise was forming along his jaw. Inside, he gasped. Quickly. She helped him to the cabin, easing him into a chair. What happened? Who were they? Holloway's men. Emmett winced as she peeled back his shirt to examine the wound of a bullet graze across his ribs, painful, but not life-threatening. Looking for both of us, and Samuel. Both of us, Abigail's hand stilled. The judge knows I'm here. Seems so. Emmett's breathing was labored but steadying. They said the witch and her husband are to be brought back for justice. Said the boy belongs to men who'll pay handsomely for his return. And the other riders? The ones that made them leave? I don't know. Emmett shook his head. I was unconscious, briefly. Woke to find them gone. He caught her wrist as she reached for bandages. They'll be back, Abigail. With more men. We need to leave. Now. Abigail nodded grimly. I'll get Samuel. As she turned toward the cellar, the cabin door burst open. Abigail raised the shotgun, finger tightening on the trigger, then froze. In the doorway stood a tall Native American man, his weathered face impassive beneath a wide-brimmed hat. Behind him, 3 more figures waited, 2 men and Martha, Emmett's housekeeper. Joseph, Emmett said, recognition and relief in his voice. Your timing is impeccable as usual. The man Joseph surveyed the cabin with sharp eyes before focusing on Abigail. So this is the Witch of Granite Falls. His English was perfect, his tone revealing nothing. Martha said you'd need help. Before Abigail could respond, Samuel emerged from the root cellar, eyes wide with fear, until he spotted Martha. The old woman said something in her native tongue, and the boy visibly relaxed. Joseph turned to Emmett. Holloway's men will return by nightfall with reinforcements. If you wish to live, you will come with us now. Emmett struggled to his feet, grimacing. Red Snake Gorge. We need to get there before they move the children. Joseph's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his dark eyes. The snake men have taken your son. Abigail stepped forward. You know of them. All who dwell in these mountains know of them. Joseph's gaze was piercing. 3 moons ago, they took children from our village. 2 boys never returned. A moment of understanding passed between them, shared grief, shared purpose. We will help you, Joseph decided, but first we must reach safety. Then we will make plans. He gestured to his companions. Gather only what you need. We ride in 5 minutes. As the others moved to help Emmett and collect supplies, Joseph remained beside Abigail. They say you have power, he said quietly, that you speak to spirits and heal with touch. I know herbs, she replied simply. Nothing more. Joseph studied her as if seeing beneath her skin to the core beneath. When a deer is hunted, he said finally, it runs or it hides. But when a wolf threatens a wolf, mother's cubs, she does not run or hide. She attacks. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. I think perhaps you are not a witch, Abigail Walsh, but you are certainly a wolf. With that, he turned away, leaving Abigail to wonder if his words were meant as compliment or warning, or perhaps most unsettling of all, a prophecy of what was to come. Dusk painted the mountains in shades of purple and gold as the small party made its way along a narrow ridge trail. Joseph led his keen eyes scanning the path ahead. Behind him rode Abigail with Samuel clinging to her waist, the boy's face buried against her back. Emmett followed his wound, freshly bandaged, but still causing him to wince with each jolt of his horse. Martha and 2 other men from Joseph's band brought up the rear alert for any sign of pursuit. They had left the cabin less than an hour after Joseph's arrival, taking only essentials, weapons, food, medical supplies, and Emmett's precious portfolio of evidence. Everything else, the books, the furniture, the small comforts that had made the place a home, was abandoned. As darkness fell, Joseph guided them off the main trail into a hidden ravine. The horses picked their way carefully down a steep path that seemed to disappear into solid rock only to open suddenly into a sheltered canyon. A small creek bubbled through its center, and the walls rose high on all sides, providing natural protection. We camp here, Joseph announced, dismounting. No fires. They worked in silence, setting up a cold camp in the growing darkness. Martha took charge of Samuel, speaking to him softly in her native tongue. The boy seemed to understand, nodding and following her instructions without question. Abigail helped Emmett dismount, noticing his pallor in the fading light. You need rest, she said quietly, guiding him to a spot where Martha had laid blankets beneath an overhanging rock. I'm fine, he insisted, though his grimace betrayed him. You're stubborn, she countered, easing him down. Let me check your wound. He submitted to her examination, watching her face as she carefully removed the blood-soaked bandage. Her features remained composed, her hands steady as she cleaned the injury with water from a canteen. You've done this before, he observed. Many times. She applied a poultice of herbs Martha had provided. though usually with more grievously wounded men. During the war, yes, her fingers worked methodically rewrapping the wound with clean cloth, though not always in uniform. Near the end, I treated whoever needed help, Union Confederate civilian. That's how you met Daniel, Emmett guessed. Abigail's hand stilled momentarily. Yes, he was a quartermaster for the Union, charming, educated. A bitter smile touched her lips, not yet revealed as the monster he would become. Men like that are skilled at hiding their true nature, and I was skilled at seeing only what I wanted to see. She secured the bandage and sat back. A mistake I won't make again. Before Emmett could respond, Joseph approached, crouching beside them. Holloway's men have returned to your cabin, he reported. 8 riders. They've set fire to it. Emmett's jaw tightened. Expected but still unwelcome news. They will search for your trail at first light, Joseph continued. We should be gone before then. Where are we going? Abigail asked. My people's summer camp. In the high country. Joseph glanced at Emmett's wound. You need time to heal before we can attempt Red Snake Gorge. We don't have time, Abigail protested. They're moving the children east. Not all at once, Emmett interrupted. Samuel said they take small groups. We still have a chance to reach Jacob. Joseph studied them both. 3 days. We rest, we plan, we gather strength. Then we move against the snake men. His tone left no room for argument. Sleep now. Tomorrow's journey will be difficult. After he'd gone, Abigail settled beside Emmett, their backs against the canyon wall. Above them, stars emerged in the vast Montana sky, cold and distant. 3 days, she whispered, her voice tight with restrained emotion. 3 days while Jacob is alive, Emmett reminded her gently. Focus on that, Abigail. Your son is alive, and he's strong enough to help Samuel escape, to survive what he's endured. 3 more days won't break him. She turned to him, her face half hidden in shadow. How can you be certain? Because he's your son. Emmett's voice held absolute conviction. And you are the strongest person I've ever known. Something shifted in Abigail's expression, surprise perhaps, or the faintest flicker of trust. She looked away, but not before Emmett saw the glint of tears she refused to shed. Rest, she said finally. I'll take first watch. Joseph's men have that covered. Nevertheless, she settled more firmly against the rock shotgun across her knees. I'll watch. Emmett knew better than to argue. Instead, he closed his eyes, letting exhaustion claim him, while Abigail kept vigil beside him, her gaze fixed on the stars as if searching for answers in their ancient light. Morning came with a biting chill. They broke camp, quickly erasing all signs of their presence before ascending a series of switchbacks that led ever higher into the mountains. The trail grew steeper, the air thinner as they climbed above the tree line into a realm of rock and sky. By midday, they reached a plateau nestled between 2 towering peaks. A cluster of hide tents stood in a loose circle around a central fire pit. Women worked at various tasks, tanning hides, preparing food, weaving baskets, while children played under watchful eyes. At their approach, activity ceased. All eyes turned to the newcomers. Joseph raised his hand in greeting. An elderly man emerged from the largest tent, his face deeply lined, his hair silver white. The 2 men spoke briefly in their native language before the elder turned to examine the strangers. Welcome to our summer camp, he said in careful English. I am Chief Gray Bear. Joseph says you fight against the snake men who steal children. Emmett dismounted with Abigail's help, then extended his hand. Emmett Walsh, this is my wife Abigail and Samuel, who escaped their captivity. Gray Bear's keen eyes assessed them. The red-haired witch and the hunter of men, he said, surprising them with his knowledge. Your names are known even in these high places. Abigail stiffened at the title, but Gray Bear raised a hand. Fear not, we judge by actions, not rumors. Come rest, eat, then we will speak of what must be done. They were shown to a tent at the edge of the camp. Inside, fur-lined bedrolls had been prepared, and a small fire pit in the center provided warmth. Martha brought food, venison stew, and flat bread before departing with Samuel, who seemed fascinated by the camp's children. Alone for the first time since leaving the cabin, Abigail and Emmett ate in companionable silence. The stew was hearty, the bread still warm, and both realized how hungry they'd been. These people, Abigail said finally, why do they help us? The snake men have taken their children too. Emmett set aside his empty bowl. Joseph lost a nephew to them last year. Abigail's expression softened with understanding. A shared enemy. More than that, the Blackfoot have been fighting this battle longer than we have. They know the territory, the hiding places. Emmett leaned back, wincing slightly as his wound pulled. We need them, Abigail. Before she could respond, Joseph appeared at the tent entrance. Chief Gray Bear wishes to speak with you, both of you. They followed him to the central tent where Gray Bear waited seated on a buffalo robe beside the small fire. He gestured for them to sit across from him. "Joseph has told me of your son," he said to Abigail, "and of the place called Red Snake Gorge." He removed a small pouch from his belt and sprinkled herbs on the fire. Sweet-smelling smoke rose between them. "Before we speak of war, I must know your hearts. The snake men are powerful, protected by corrupt white men's law. Why do you stand against them?" Emmett spoke first. "Because they prey on the vulnerable. Because they destroy families for profit. Because what they do is evil, and I've sworn to stop them." Gray Bear nodded, then turned to Abigail, waiting. "Because they have my son," she said simply, "and I would tear down heaven and earth to bring him home." A smile creased the old man's weathered face. "Good answers. True answers." He leaned forward. "Now I will tell you what you face. The snake men came to our territories 3 winters ago. At first they took only white children from settlements. Then they grew bolder, taking our children too. Those who resisted were killed." "How many are they?" Emmett asked. "Their numbers change. Men come and go, but always there is the one they call doctor." Gray Bear's expression darkened. "He chooses which children live, which die, which are sent east. He wears a mask carved from bone." "Sebastian Gray," Emmett murmured. Gray Bear nodded. "That is one of his names. He has many." "And Red Snake Gorge," Abigail prompted. "Samuel described a compound there." "Yes, built in an old mining camp hidden deep in the canyon. Difficult to approach, always guarded." The chief traced a rough map in the dirt between them. "Here the main entrance, here, and here guard posts. And here," he pointed to a narrow line, "a hidden path known only to my people. It leads to the back of their compound." Emmett studied the crude map intently. "How many guards?" 12, perhaps 15, armed with rifles, pistols. "And inside, how many children?" Gray Bear's face grew somber. "Many, too many." He looked directly at Abigail. "Some are kept in cages like animals. Others are chained. The strongest boys are sometimes forced to fight each other for the guards' amusement." Abigail's hands clenched in her lap, but her voice remained steady. "And Jacob Samuel said he was being sent east. The doctor selects children for different fates. Some go to mines, some to factories, some," he hesitated, "some to other places where they are sold to wealthy men with particular tastes." Emmett's face hardened. "When do these shipments take place?" "Every new moon. The next is 3 nights from now." Abigail surged to her feet, pacing the small confines of the tent. 3 nights. Then we have no time to waste." "Sit, daughter of fire," Gray Bear said gently. "Anger clouds judgment. We must plan carefully if we are to save the children." She reluctantly resumed her seat, though tension radiated from her like heat from flame. "My warriors will help you," Gray Bear continued, "but not for revenge, for the children. All the children." He fixed Abigail with a penetrating gaze. "Can you fight for more than just your son?" Without hesitation, she nodded. "Every child there deserves freedom. Every single one." Gray Bear seemed satisfied. "Good. Then tomorrow we prepare. Joseph will show you our weapons, teach you our signals. The day after we scout the gorge. And on the 3rd day," he smiled grimly, "on the 3rd day we bring war to the snake men." The next morning broke clear and cold. True to Gray Bear's word, Joseph led them to a secluded clearing where warriors were already practicing with various weapons, bows, knives, and a few prize rifles. Samuel had begged to come along, but Martha had kept him in camp, distracting him with stories and simple tasks. The boy still woke screaming from nightmares, and Abigail worried about his fragile state of mind. Yet his determination to help rescue Jacob and the others remained unshaken. "He's brave," Emmett commented as they watched Joseph demonstrate a particular knife-fighting technique. "Like someone else I know." Abigail's expression softened briefly. "He reminds me of Jacob, that same stubborn spirit." Throughout the day, they trained Emmett despite his injury, which was healing well under Martha's care, and Abigail with a focus that impressed even the most seasoned warriors. Her height and strength, once sources of mockery in Granite Falls, proved advantageous in combat training. By day's end, she could load and fire a rifle with remarkable speed and accuracy. "You've handled guns before," Joseph observed. "My father taught me," she replied, "before Daniel forbade it." That evening, they gathered around the central fire with Gray Bear Joseph and the other warriors who would accompany them. Emmett spread out a more detailed map he'd drawn based on Samuel's descriptions and the Blackfoot's knowledge. "The compound has 3 main structures," he explained, pointing to each. "Here the children are kept. Here the guards' quarters. And here," his finger rested on the largest building, "is where the doctor conducts his examinations and makes his selections," Joseph added grimly. Abigail studied the layout. "Samuel said Jacob was being held separately after his selection." "Where would that be?" Emmett indicated a small structure apart from the others. Probably here. They keep the special merchandise isolated. The words tasted bitter in his mouth. Then that's where I'll go, Abigail stated firmly. We go together, Emmett corrected. The plan is simple, but depends on precise timing. Joseph and 4 warriors will create a diversion at the main gate. The rest of us will approach from the hidden trail entering through the rear. Our primary objective is to free the children with minimal confrontation. And if confrontation can't be avoided, one of the warriors asked. Emmett's expression hardened. Then we do what's necessary. The discussion continued late into the night, refining details, anticipating obstacles. Throughout it all, Abigail remained intensely focused, absorbing every detail, offering insights based on Samuel's account. Only Emmett noticed how her hands occasionally trembled, or how she pressed her fingers against the small, blood-stained handkerchief she kept always in her pocket, Jacob's handkerchief. When the meeting finally ended, most retired to their tents. Abigail, however, walked to the edge of the plateau, staring out at the vast expanse of stars above the darkened valley. Emmett followed, standing beside her in companionable silence for several minutes before speaking. You should rest. Tomorrow will be demanding. I can't sleep, she admitted. Every time I close my eyes, I see him, waiting, wondering why I haven't come for him. He knows you would if you could. Emmett's voice was gentle. Samuel said Jacob still tells stories about you. He hasn't forgotten. But will he recognize me after all this time, after all he's endured? Her voice caught. Will he see his mother or the witch they've surely told him I am? Emmett turned to face her. He'll know you, Abigail. Some bonds can't be broken, not by time or distance or lies. She met his gaze, moonlight silvering her features. You sound certain. I am. He hesitated, then continued softly. When I found you in that cage, I recognized you immediately, despite 15 years, and everything that had changed us both. Some connections endure. Something shifted in her expression, a softening, a momentary vulnerability quickly concealed. You should rest too, she said finally. Your wound needs time to heal. It's better. Martha's poultice works wonders. Nevertheless, she turned back toward the camp. Tomorrow we scout the gorge. We both need our strength. Emmett nodded, falling into step beside her. They walked in silence back to their tent, each lost in private thoughts, but drawing comfort from the other's presence, a comfort neither would have predicted when they'd first met outside that iron cage less than 2 weeks ago. Red Snake Gorge earned its name from the rust-colored sandstone that wound through the landscape like a massive serpent. Deep and narrow with sheer walls rising hundreds of feet, it created a natural prison from which escape seemed impossible. Abigail, Emmett, Joseph, and 2 other warriors lay on their stomachs at the gorge's rim, peering down at the compound below. From this vantage point, they could see the entire operation. The 3 main buildings Samuel had described, the fenced yard, where children exercised under guard, the stables, and the small outlying structure where special children might be kept. 8 guards visible, Joseph whispered, surveying the scene through Emmett's field glass. 4 at the gate, 2 patrolling the fence, 2 by the main house. More inside, presumably, Emmett added, taking the glass for his own observation. And there the children. Abigail squinted in the direction he indicated. In the yard, perhaps 20 children of various ages walked in a circle under the watchful eyes of armed men. Even from this distance, their movements appeared listless, defeated. I don't see Jacob, she murmured, anxiety tightening her throat. The special ones wouldn't be with the others, Joseph reminded her. If he's been selected for transport, he'll be kept apart. In that building, Emmett confirmed, pointing to the isolated structure. Heavily guarded. See the 2 men at the door. Abigail nodded, memorizing every detail. When do they change guards? Every 4 hours, judging by what we've observed. Emmett consulted his pocket watch. Next change should be around sundown. They watched for another hour, noting patterns of movement, vulnerabilities in the compound's security. The guards were armed but casual, clearly not expecting any threat in this remote location. Children were brought inside as afternoon waned, herded like cattle into the largest structure. Enough, Joseph finally said. We've seen what we need to see. Tomorrow we return with warriors. As they carefully withdrew from the rim, Abigail's foot dislodged a small stone. It clattered down the canyon wall, a sound that seemed deafening in the quiet afternoon. Everyone froze. Below, a guard looked up, scanning the rim with narrowed eyes. For a heart-stopping moment, it seemed he'd spotted them. Then he shrugged, returning to his patrol. Close, Joseph breathed as they retreated into the cover of scrub pine. Too close. They're complacent, Emmett observed. That works in our favor. The journey back to the Blackfoot camp was tense, each lost in thoughts of what tomorrow would bring. Abigail rode slightly apart from the others, her face set in lines of grim determination. When they stopped to rest the horses, Emmett approached her. You're very quiet. I'm preparing, she replied, her voice distant. Tomorrow I either find my son or— Don't think that way, Emmett advised. Focus on the plan, on what must be done. She turned to him suddenly. And after, if we succeed, if we free the children, what then? I'm still a fugitive accused of murder and witchcraft. Jacob and I would have nowhere safe to go. The question caught Emmett off guard. In truth, he hadn't thought beyond the rescue. His mission had been to dismantle Sebastian Gray's operation. Finding Abigail had been unexpected personal. We'll figure that out when the time comes, he said finally. One battle at a time. Abigail studied him as if trying to read the truth behind his words. You're a good man, Emmett Walsh. Better than I deserve after what I've done. You defended yourself and your child against monsters. There's no sin in that. I took 3 lives, she said quietly. Whatever their crimes, their blood is on my hands. I'll carry that forever. Emmett stepped closer, his voice low but intense. We all carry burdens, Abigail. After the war, I hunted deserters for the army. Some were cowards, yes, but others were just broken men who couldn't bear more killing. His eyes held hers. I brought them back to face firing squads. I told myself I was upholding the law, but in truth I was just following orders without questioning their justice. Abigail absorbed this confession, understanding it for what it was, not just a sharing of guilt, but a bridge between them. Perhaps that's why we found each other, she said softly. 2 damaged souls seeking redemption. Perhaps. His hand moved as if to touch her face, then fell back to his side. We should rejoin the others. The moment passed, but something had shifted between them, a deepening of trust, a recognition of shared pain and purpose that went beyond their temporary alliance. They returned to camp by nightfall to find preparations already underway. Women mended clothing and packed food for the journey. Men checked weapons and sharpened knives. Even the children participated solemnly, carrying water and gathering firewood, aware that something momentous approached. Samuel ran to Abigail the moment she dismounted. Did you see them? He asked urgently. Did you see the other children? She knelt to his level, hands gentle on his shoulders. Yes. And tomorrow we're going to free them all. His face lit with fierce joy. I'm coming too. No, Samuel. You stay here where it's safe. But I know the inside I can help. His eyes filled with desperate tears. I promised Jacob I'd bring help. I promised. Abigail looked to Emmett, who had dismounted more carefully, mindful of his healing wound. The boy has a point, he admitted. His knowledge could be valuable. It's too dangerous, Abigail insisted. Not if he stays with Martha, Joseph interjected, joining their conversation. She will wait with the horses at the gorge's entrance. The boy can guide us through the compound, then return to her once we've entered. Samuel nodded eagerly. Please, Miss Abigail, I need to help, for Jacob, for all of them. After a long moment, Abigail relented. Very well, but you follow orders exactly. No heroics? Understood. Yes, ma'am. The boy's relief was palpable. I'll show you everything, the doors, the guards, where they keep the keys. I remember it all. That evening they gathered once more around Gray Bear's fire. The old chief listened as they reported what they had observed, then nodded gravely. Tomorrow then, at dusk when they change guards. He raised weathered hands to the fire. Tonight we pray to the spirits for strength and wisdom, for the safe return of all our children. A solemn mood settled over the camp. Warriors painted their faces with ochre and ash. Women sang low, haunting melodies that carried on the night wind. Children watched with wide, knowing eyes, understanding that their own safety hung in the balance of tomorrow's battle. In their tent, Abigail and Emmett made final preparations. She cleaned the shotgun Joseph had given her, movements methodical, focused. Emmett checked his revolver and rifle, then laid out extra ammunition on a small blanket. Try to sleep, he advised as the camp gradually quieted. We leave before dawn. Abigail set aside the shotgun and stretched out on her bedroll, knowing sleep would likely elude her. Emmett did the same, leaving a respectful distance between them. In the darkness, her voice came soft but clear. Emmett, yes. Thank you for everything you have done. Whatever happens tomorrow. We'll find him, Emmett assured her. Together. A long silence, then. I believe you. Those 3 simple words, spoken in the darkness of a Blackfoot tent high in the Montana mountains, carried more weight than elaborate vows. In them, Emmett heard not just trust, but something he'd thought lost to both of them, hope. Dawn had not yet broken when they departed the Blackfoot camp. 17 in all, Emmett, Abigail, Samuel, Martha, Joseph, and 12 warriors. They traveled light, each carrying only weapons, water, and minimal provisions. The plan allowed no time for an extended siege. They would strike fast and withdraw faster, using the cover of darkness to escape with the children. The journey to Red Snake Gorge took most of the day as they followed a circuitous route to avoid detection. By late afternoon, they reached the hidden trail Joseph had described, a narrow path winding down the canyon wall barely visible unless one knew exactly where to look. They established a base camp in a sheltered hollow half a mile from the gorge. While the warriors made final preparations, Emmett gathered Abigail, Joseph, and Samuel for one last review of the plan. Joseph and 4 warriors create a diversion at the main gate, he recapped. The rest of us enter through the rear, following Samuel's directions. Abigail and I head for the isolation building to find Jacob and any other special children. Joseph's men free the others from the main dormitory. And if we encounter the doctor, Abigail asked, her voice hard. He's mine, Emmett stated flatly. I need him alive if possible. He's the key to the entire network. Joseph nodded. And the guards? Do what's necessary, Emmett replied grimly. But remember, our priority is the children. We're not there for revenge. Though Abigail's expression suggested she might disagree with that last point, she said nothing. Samuel, sitting cross-legged beside Martha, pointed to Emmett's crude map. The keys are kept here in the guard room, and there's a back door to the special building here. That's how they brought new children in sometimes. Good boy, Emmett praised him. You've been very brave. Now, when we reach the gorge, you'll show us the path down, then stay with Martha. Understood? Samuel nodded solemnly. Yes, sir. As the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, they moved out. Martha and Samuel would remain with the horse at the base of the hidden trail. The others would proceed on foot to minimize noise and visibility. The descent was treacherous, a narrow path of loose shale that threatened to give way with each step. Abigail followed Joseph closely, her tall frame somewhat awkward on the steep trail. Emmett came behind her, occasionally reaching out to steady her when the footing grew particularly precarious. At the bottom, they gathered in the shadow of a massive boulder. Dusk was deepening into night, the compound's lights beginning to glow in the gathering darkness. The time for the guard change approached. Joseph clasped Emmett's forearm in the warrior's grip. May the spirits guide your steps, brother. And yours, Emmett returned. We meet back here in 1 hour with the children. Joseph nodded, then slipped away with his 4 warriors, moving silently toward the compound's main entrance. Abigail checked her shotgun one last time, then met Emmett's gaze. For Jacob, she whispered. For all of them, he replied. They waited in tense silence, counting the minutes until they heard a sudden commotion at the far end of the compound. Shouts, then gunfire erupted near the main gate. Now, Emmett commanded. The remaining group moved swiftly through the deepening shadows, approaching the compound's rear wall. A crude fence of sharpened logs presented the first obstacle, but the diversion had drawn most of the guards to the front. Only one man remained at the rear gate, and he fell silently to a Blackfoot warrior's knife before he could raise the alarm. Inside the compound, chaos reigned. Most of the guards had rushed to the main gate, where Joseph's diversionary attack continued. Smoke rose from one of the outbuildings, part of the planned distraction. This way, Emmett directed, leading their group toward the children's dormitory. The Blackfoot warriors peeled off as planned, heading for the main building, while Emmett and Abigail continued toward the isolated structure where Jacob might be held. They encountered a guard rushing from the building, rifle raised. Abigail's shotgun roared before he could fire the blast, catching him full in the chest. The man crumpled without a sound. There will be more inside, Emmett warned as they approached the small building. Abigail merely nodded, her face set in determined lines. The door was locked. Emmett gestured for Abigail to stand back, then slammed his boot against it with all his strength. The aged wood splintered around the lock, and the door crashed inward. Inside, oil lamps cast a sickly yellow glow over a scene from nightmares. 6 small figures huddled in individual cages along one wall, children selected for special treatment. At the far end of the room, a man in a dark coat stood beside a desk covered with papers. He wore a mask carved from bone. Sebastian Gray, Emmett said, his voice deadly calm as he leveled his revolver. Or do you prefer Doctor? The masked man showed no sign of surprise or fear. Agent Walsh, he replied smoothly. Pinkerton's bloodhound. I wondered when you'd find me. Abigail had gone straight to the cages, examining each child's face with frantic intensity. Jacob, she called softly. Jacob, it's Mother. One of the children stirred, a small, dark-haired boy with haunted eyes. Mama, he whispered uncertainly. A cry escaped Abigail's throat as she dropped to her knees before his cage. Yes, love, it's me. I've come to take you home. Gray laughed behind his mask. How touching. The witch and her demon child reunited at last. He gestured dismissively. Take him if you wish. He's proven difficult to train, unlike some of the others who show real promise. Emmett kept his revolver trained on Gray. You're finished, Doctor. Your operation ends tonight. I think not. Gray's voice remained unnervingly calm. You see, this is merely one outpost of many. Cut off one head and 2 more grow in its place. He reached slowly into his coat. Besides, you won't leave this gorge alive. My men are otherwise occupied, Emmett finished. Now hands where I can see them. Instead, Gray lunged toward a side door. Emmett fired the bullet, catching Gray in the shoulder, spinning him around. The bone mass clattered to the floor, revealing a surprisingly ordinary face, middle-aged with cold eyes and a thin-lipped mouth now twisted in pain. You'll hang for this, Gray snarled, clutching his wounded shoulder. Perhaps, Emmett acknowledged, advancing to secure him. But so will you. Meanwhile, Abigail had found the keys hanging on a hook near the desk. With trembling hands, she unlocked Jacob's cage. The boy crawled out slowly, uncertainly. 6 years old, but looking younger, his small frame emaciated, his green eyes so like his mother's, huge in his pale face. Mama, he whispered again, reaching out a tentative hand to touch her hair. Is it really you? They said you were dead, that you didn't want me anymore. They lied, Abigail choked out, gathering him gently into her arms. I never stopped looking for you, never stopped loving you, my precious boy. Jacob buried his face against her neck, his small body racked with sobs. I knew you'd come. I told the others you would. And now we're taking all of you home, she promised, pressing kisses to his dirty hair. All of you. While Abigail freed the other 5 children, 2 girls and 3 boys all under 10 years old, Emmett bound Gray's hands behind his back. The man had ceased his threats, watching the proceedings with cold calculation. You've won nothing, he said softly for Emmett's ears alone. The merchandise will simply be rerouted. The business continues. Not for you, Emmett replied, tightening the bonds until Gray winced, and not for your associates in Granite Falls. Judge Holloway, Reverend Caldwell, we have evidence linking them to your operation. Their days of protection are over. For the first time, uncertainty flickered in Gray's eyes. A commotion outside drew their attention. Joseph appeared in the doorway, blood streaming from a cut on his forehead, but his eyes alight with fierce joy. We have them, he reported. 23 children from the main building, all alive. His gaze moved to Jacob, still clinging to Abigail, then to the other rescued children, 29 in all. Any sign of your people's missing children? Emmett asked. Joseph's expression darkened. No, they must have been moved already. He glanced at Gray with undisguised hatred. This one might know where. He'll talk, Emmett assured him, once we get him back to civilization. Abigail rose, lifting Jacob with her. Though 6, he weighed little more than a 3-year-old, his legs instinctively wrapping around her waist. We need to move, she said urgently, before reinforcements arrive. Emmett nodded. Joseph, gather your warriors. We leave immediately. As they prepared to depart, Gray spoke again, his voice pitched for Abigail alone. He'll never be the same, you know. What he's seen, what he's endured, it changes a child. Breaks something that can't be repaired. Abigail turned to him slowly, Jacob's face still pressed against her shoulder. You're wrong, she said, her voice steady despite the fury in her eyes. Children heal. They're stronger than you know. We shall see. Gray's smile was chilling. When the nightmares come. When he wakes screaming. When he can't bear to be touched. Then you'll remember my words. Before Abigail could respond, Emmett gripped Gray's injured shoulder, making him gasp in pain. Enough, he growled. Move. They exited the building to find the compound in disarray. Several structures burned, casting an apocalyptic glow over the scene. Bodies of guards lay where they had fallen. Joseph's warriors had gathered the rescued children, a pitiful collection of thin, frightened faces near the rear gate. Where are the rest of your men? Emmett demanded of Gray. Dead, fled, or surrendered, Joseph answered instead. But more will come. We must hurry. The journey back up the hidden trail was arduous, especially with 29 traumatized children, many too weak to walk far. The warriors carried the smallest. The older ones helped each other. Abigail refused to relinquish Jacob, carrying him the entire way, despite Emmett's offers to take him. Gray, prodded at gunpoint by Emmett, climbed in sullen silence, clearly calculating his chances of escape. They were non-existent. Joseph's warriors watched him with the cold eyes of predators, just waiting for an excuse. At the top, Martha and Samuel waited with the horses. The boy's face lit with joy when he saw the rescued children, particularly when he spotted Jacob in Abigail's arms. You found him, he cried, rushing forward. Jacob peered cautiously over his mother's shoulder. Samuel, he whispered, you came back. I promised, didn't I? Samuel grinned, though tears streaked his face. I said I'd bring help. The reunion was brief. They had miles to cover before dawn. The strongest warriors gave up their horses to carry children. Others fashioned makeshift travois to transport the weakest. Gray was bound to his saddle, guarded by 2 warriors, who made no effort to be gentle with his wounded shoulder. As they prepared to depart, Emmett found Abigail standing slightly apart, Jacob still in her arms, his head now lolling in exhausted sleep against her shoulder. You should let one of the warriors carry him. Emmett suggested gently. It's a long journey back to camp. I can't, she whispered, her arms tightening around her son. Not yet. I'm afraid if I let go, he'll disappear again. Emmett understood. Then at least ride. Take my horse. After a moment's hesitation, she nodded. Emmett helped her mount, carefully arranging Jacob in her lap so the boy could continue sleeping. Thank you, she said softly, looking down at him from the saddle. For everything. We're not safe yet, he reminded her. There's still a long road ahead. I know. Her gaze drifted to the sleeping child in her arms, then back to Emmett. But for the first time in too long, it's a road with hope. He nodded, understanding the depth of feeling behind her simple words. Then, with a gentle touch to her horse's flank, he sent her forward, falling into step beside, and as their strange procession began the long journey back to the Blackfoot camp. Behind them, smoke rose from Red Snake Gorge, a signal visible for miles that something had changed in the Montana wilderness. Whether that change would last, whether Sebastian Gray's network could truly be dismantled, remained to be seen. But for tonight, 29 children had been freed from captivity. For tonight, a mother had found her lost son. For tonight, it was enough, or some. The journey back to the Blackfoot camp took twice as long with the weakened children. They traveled through the night and most of the following day, stopping only when absolutely necessary. Joseph sent 2 warriors ahead to prepare the camp for their arrival and to begin brewing medicinal teas for the children, many of whom showed signs of malnutrition and abuse. Gray remained sullenly silent throughout the journey, refusing food and speaking only to demand water. Emmett kept him separate from the children, aware of the psychological torment the man's mere presence might inflict on those he'd terrorized for so long. Abigail rode with Jacob cradled against her, the boy drifting in and out of consciousness. When he awake, he clung to her desperately as if afraid she might vanish. When asleep, he whimpered and twitched, trapped in nightmares she couldn't chase away. He needs time, Emmett assured her during one of their brief rests. And patience. And safety, she added grimly, glancing toward Gray. Something we don't yet have. We will. Emmett's certainty was absolute. Once we reach Helena, I'll telegraph the Pinkerton office. Gray's arrest will be the beginning of the end for his entire operation. And what of us? Abigail's question was soft but urgent. I'm still wanted for murder in Granite Falls. Jacob and I can't simply walk into Helena. Emmett hesitated. The question had been weighing on him as well. Legally, Abigail was his wife, a status that offered some protection. But the charges against her were serious, and Judge Holloway's influence extended throughout the territory. First, we get the children to safety, he said finally. Then we'll figure out the rest, one step at a time. Abigail seemed about to press further when Jacob stirred in her arms. The boy's eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then widening with fear until they found his mother's face. I thought it was a dream, he whispered. I thought you weren't real. I'm real, love. She brushed matted hair from his forehead, and I'm not going anywhere. Promise with all my heart. Jacob's gaze shifted to Emmett, curiosity momentarily overcoming fear. Who's he? Abigail glanced up, something vulnerable in her expression. This is Emmett. He helped me find you. He's a friend, Jacob asked cautiously. Yes, she replied softly, a very good friend. Emmett crouched to the boy's level, careful to maintain a non-threatening distance. Hello, Jacob. I've heard a lot about you. The boy studied him with solemn green eyes, so like his mother's. Did you shoot the bad man? The one with the mask? I did. Good. Jacob's voice hardened with a child's simple justice. He hurt people. He made them cry. He won't hurt anyone else, Emmett promised. Not ever again. Something in his tone must have reassured the boy, for Jacob relaxed slightly in his mother's arms. I'm hungry, he announced. It was such a normal, childlike statement after everything that had happened that Abigail gave a choked laugh. Of course you are. She looked to Emmett. Is there anything? He was already reaching into his saddlebag, producing a strip of jerky and a small apple salvaged from their provisions. It's not much, but it should help until we reach camp. Jacob accepted the offerings with grave courtesy. Thank you, sir. Emmett, he corrected gently. Just Emmett. The boy nodded, then turned his full attention to the food hunger, temporarily overwhelming trauma. Watching him, Abigail's eyes filled with tears, she quickly blinked away. He remembers his manners, she whispered to Emmett. After everything he remembers. Emmett understood her amazement. Children were resilient in ways adults could scarcely comprehend. Despite the horrors Jacob had endured, some essential part of him, the part shaped by his mother's love in those crucial early years, had survived intact. We should move on, Joseph interrupted, approaching their small group. The other children grow weary, and darkness comes soon. They resumed their journey, pushing through exhaustion. By nightfall, the welcome fires of the Blackfoot camp appeared on the plateau ahead, golden beacons in the gathering dusk. A cheer went up as they entered the camp, a sound of triumph and relief. Women rushed forward to take charge of the rescued children, guiding them toward the communal fire where food and medicine awaited. Gray Bear stood at the center, arms raised in blessing as each child passed. Martha took charge of Jacob, gently coaxing him from Abigail's arms with promises of warm food and clean clothes. The boy went reluctantly, looking back at his mother, with fear still evident in his eyes. "I'll be right there," Abigail assured him. "Just let Martha help you wash first." As the children were settled, Emmett and Joseph escorted Gray to a separate tent under heavy guard. The man's wound had been treated minimally enough to prevent death, but little more. Now he sat bound and defeated, his empire crumbling around him. "You'll remain here until we're ready to transport you to Helena," Emmett informed him. "Don't bother trying to escape. The Blackfoot have their own justice for child stealers, and it's far less pleasant than a territorial prison." Gray raised his head, hatred burning in his eyes. "This changes nothing, Walsh. The operation is bigger than me. It will continue. Perhaps, but without its mastermind, it will falter." Emmett turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing. Those 2 Blackfoot boys taken 3 months ago, where were they sent?" A cruel smile twisted Gray's lips. "You're too late for them. They didn't survive the journey east. Too wild, too difficult to control." Joseph moved with lightning speed, his knife suddenly at Gray's throat. "Their names," he growled. "Say their name." Gray's smile vanished, replaced by genuine fear as the blade pressed against his skin. I don't know their names. They were just merchandise." Emmett placed a restraining hand on Joseph's arm. "We need him alive," he reminded the warrior. "For justice, for all the children." After a tense moment, Joseph withdrew, though his eyes promised death. "There are worse things than dying," he told Gray softly. "Remember that in the nights to come." Outside the tent, Emmett took a deep breath of the clear mountain air, trying to clear his mind of Gray's poisonous presence. The camp had transformed since their departure, more tents erected, more fires burning, as the Blackfoot made room for their unexpected guests. Near the central fire, he spotted Abigail sitting with Jacob in her lap. The boy was clean now, dressed in deerskin clothing, provided by the tribe, his dark hair damp from washing. He ate slowly from a wooden bowl, occasionally looking up at his mother, as if to reassure himself she was still there. Emmett approached carefully, not wanting to intrude on their reunion. But Jacob saw him and, to his surprise, smiled shyly. "Hello again," Emmett said, crouching nearby. "Hello." Jacob studied him with curious intensity. "Martha says you're mother's husband now." Emmett glanced at Abigail, who looked equally startled by the boy's directness. "That's complicated," he hedged. "But you live together in a house." "We did, yes." Emmett chose his words carefully. "Your mother and I are friends who help each other." Jacob considered this, then nodded sagely. "Like me and Samuel. We helped each other too." "Exactly like that," Emmett agreed, relieved at the boy's acceptance. Abigail's expression softened as she watched the exchange. For the first time since he'd known her, she looked almost at peace despite the exhaustion evident in the shadows beneath her eyes. "Jacob needs rest," she said finally. "We all do." "Of course." Emmett rose. "Martha has prepared a tent for you both. I'll check on the other children, then see about our plans for tomorrow." As he turned to leave, Jacob's small voice stopped him. "Are you going away?" The question held such genuine concern that Emmett found himself oddly touched. "No," he assured the boy. "I'll be right here in camp." "Good." Jacob nestled closer to his mother. "Because Mother needs a friend too." Abigail's eyes met Emmett's over her son's head, a complex emotion in their green depths that he couldn't quite interpret. "Yes," she said softly. "I suppose I do." That night, as the camp settled into exhausted slumber, Emmett sat alone by a small fire, making notes in his journal. The rescue had succeeded beyond expectations, but difficult questions remained. How to get 29 children safely to Helena? How to protect Abigail from arrest? How to ensure Sebastian Gray faced justice while exposing his powerful accomplices? So focused was he on these problems that he didn't notice Graybear's approach until the old chief settled beside him. "Your thoughts trouble you, hunter of men," the chief observed. Emmett sighed, closing his journal. "We've won a battle, not the war. Gray's network is vast, with allies in high places. Yet you have struck a mighty blow. The children are free. For now, but what happens next?" Emmett gestured toward the sleeping camp. "Most have homes to return to, but Abigail and Jacob, they're fugitives. And the others, the orphans, Gray collected, what becomes of them?" Graybear studied the fire, his weathered face thoughtful. "My people say when you cannot see the path ahead, look to where your feet stand now. The next step will reveal itself." "Wise advice," Emmett acknowledged, "but difficult to follow when so many lives hang in the balance." "The red-haired woman," Graybear said suddenly, "she carries great power. Not the evil kind her accusers claim, but the true power of a mother's heart. Such strength can move mountains. Or face down an entire town that branded her a witch, Emmett added wryly. You care for her? It wasn't a question. Emmett hesitated, then nodded slowly. I do. More than I expected. And the boy, he's part of her. How could I not? Gray Bear smiled, the firelight deepening the creases around his eyes. Then perhaps your path is clearer than you think, Emmett Walsh. Before Emmett could respond, a cry pierced the night, a child's voice high with terror. Jacob. Emmett was on his feet, instantly rushing toward Abigail's tent. He found her cradling her son, who thrashed in the grip of a nightmare, screaming about the masked man and dark cages. Jacob, wake up. Abigail pleaded, her voice breaking as she tried to gentle his flailing limbs. It's Mother. You're safe now. The boy's eyes flew open, wild with panic, until they focused on his mother's face. Then he collapsed against her, sobbing uncontrollably. He said you'd leave, Jacob choked out between sobs. The doctor. He said you'd send me away again. Never, Abigail vowed, fiercely rocking him in her arms. Never, my love. Emmett stood uncertainly in the tent entrance, unsure whether to stay or withdraw. Abigail looked up, her face streaked with tears, and something in her expression made the decision for him. He moved to sit beside them, close enough to offer support, but maintaining enough distance not to overwhelm the frightened child. Bad dreams are scary, he said quietly to Jacob. But they're just dreams. They can't hurt you. Jacob peered at him through tear-soaked lashes. Did you have bad dreams after the bad men hurt you? He pointed to the scar on Emmett's face. The innocent question caught Emmett off guard. Yes, he admitted, for a long time. Do they ever go away? Emmett considered lying, offering false comfort, but something in the boy's earnest gaze demanded honesty. Not completely, but they get smaller, less frightening, and you get stronger. Jacob seemed to accept this, his breathing gradually calming as he leaned against his mother. Will you stay? He asked Emmett suddenly. Just until I fall asleep again. The request, so simple yet laden with trust, touched something deep in Emmett's heart. He glanced at Abigail, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Of course, he agreed, settling more comfortably on the tent floor. I'll be right here. Jacob's eyes drifted closed, exhaustion reclaiming him despite his fears. But his small hand reached out, finding Emmett's much larger one and holding on with surprising strength. As the boy slipped back into sleep, peaceful this time, Emmett looked up to find Abigail watching him with an expression he couldn't quite name. Gratitude, certainly. Relief. But something else, too. Something that made his heart beat faster despite his attempts to maintain professional distance. Thank you, she whispered. No need, he replied softly. Try to rest. Tomorrow brings new challenges. She nodded, shifting to lie beside her sleeping son, one protective arm draped over his small body. Her eyes remained on Emmett's face, however thoughtful and questioning. What happens now? She asked, echoing his earlier conversation with Gray Bear. Where do we go from here? It was the question that had been haunting him since their successful rescue, a question with no easy answer. Yet looking at mother and child, both finally reunited after so much suffering, Emmett found clarity emerging from confusion. We go forward, he said simply, together. Her eyes held his for a long moment before she nodded, accepting his answer, not as a definitive plan, but as a promise, one he intended to keep whatever challenges tomorrow might bring. Dawn broke over the Blackfoot camp, painting the mountains gold and casting long shadows across the plateau. The rescued children slept late, their bodies reclaiming strength after months of deprivation. Those who woke early sat quietly by the central fire, accepting food from Martha and the other women, with wary gratitude, their eyes constantly scanning for danger despite their apparent safety. Abigail emerged from her tent with Jacob still asleep in her arms. The boy had suffered 3 more nightmares during the night, each leaving him trembling and disoriented. Now exhausted, he slumbered against her shoulder as she sought the warmth of the morning fire. Emmett was already there, conferring quietly with Joseph and Gray Bear. Maps were spread on a blanket between them, routes traced with charcoal options weighed. They looked up as she approached. How is he, Emmett asked, his voice gentle. Sleeping finally. Abigail settled carefully beside them, arranging Jacob so he wouldn't wake. The nightmares came often. As expected, Gray Bear said sadly, the spirit needs time to heal just as the body does. Joseph rolled up the maps. We've been discussing our next steps. Gray must be taken to Helena to face justice. And the children returned to their families where possible, Emmett added. It's a complex undertaking. Abigail's arms tightened around Jacob. And what of us? What happens when we reach civilization? The question hung in the morning air, heavy with implication. Emmett exchanged a glance with Gray Bear before answering. I've been considering that. He moved closer, lowering his voice. Legally, you're my wife. That offers some protection, But the charges against you in Granite Falls are serious. Murder and witchcraft, she said flatly. Not easily dismissed. No, but perhaps not impossible to fight with the right evidence. Emmett's expression grew determined. Sebastian Gray's testimony, coupled with what we found at the compound, could exonerate you. Prove that Daniel Blackwood was part of a criminal enterprise, that you acted in self-defense. Hope flickered in Abigail's eyes, quickly tempered by caution. Judge Holloway would never allow such testimony. He's part of it all. Then we bypass Holloway, take our evidence directly to the territorial governor. Emmett leaned forward, intent. I have connections, Abigail. People who trust my judgment, who would listen. Graybear nodded slowly. A bold path, but not without danger. Every path before us holds danger, Abigail observed, looking down at her sleeping son. I only know I cannot run forever. Jacob deserves a home stability. Then we face this head on, Emmett decided, but carefully. Joseph and 4 warriors will escort Gray to Helena under my authority as a Pinkerton agent. I've written detailed reports of everything we've discovered, the compound, the trafficking operation, Holloway's involvement. My superiors will ensure it reaches the right hands. And the children, Abigail asked. Most will travel with us to Helena, where arrangements can be made to return them to their families. Emmett hesitated. The Blackfoot children who were taken, Joseph has agreed to help track what happened to them. And the orphans among the rescued, he shrugged. The territorial orphanage in Helena is better than most. Jacob stirred against Abigail's shoulder, whimpering softly before settling again. She stroked his back, soothing him unconsciously as she considered their options. When do we leave? She asked finally. Tomorrow, Joseph answered. The children need one more day of rest and nourishment, and we must prepare for a difficult journey. Graybear rose with the dignity of his years. Tonight we will hold a healing ceremony for the children, for their spirits. He looked pointedly at Jacob. He should attend. All should attend. After the chief had departed, Joseph excused himself to check on Gray and organize preparations for their journey, leaving Emmett and Abigail alone by the fire. Do you truly believe I could be exonerated? She asked quietly. Emmett met her gaze directly. I believe in justice, Abigail, and I believe your actions were justified. Whether the territorial court will agree, he shook his head. I can't promise outcomes, only that I'll fight alongside you. She studied him, this man who had appeared so unexpectedly in her life, first as a distant memory from the war, then as unlikely savior, now as, what ally friend? Something more complex that neither had dared name. Why, how? She asked simply. Why risk so much for us? The question seemed to catch him off guard. He looked away, watching the flames dance in the morning breeze. At first it was the debt, he admitted. You saved my life at Shiloh, I never forgot that. His voice softened. But now it's more than obligation. You and Jacob, you deserve justice. Peace. A faint smile touched his lips. And perhaps I'm selfish enough to want to be part of that peace when it comes. The honesty of his answer moved her. Before she could respond, however, Jacob woke with a start, his small body tensing before he recognized his surroundings. Good morning, love, Abigail murmured, pressing a kiss to his forehead. Jacob blinked sleepily, then noticed Emmett. A shy smile crossed his face. You stayed, he said, voice still thick with sleep. All night. I promised I would, Emmett replied. The simple exchange held more meaning than the words themselves. Trust offered and honored, a foundation being built one small moment at a time. Martha approached with bowls of porridge sweetened with dried berries. Jacob accepted his, cautiously still unused to regular meals after months of deprivation. He ate slowly, methodically, as if expecting the food to be taken away at any moment. The other children, he asked between careful bites, are they all right? They're safe, Abigail assured him, thanks to you and Samuel. Jacob's expression grew solemn. Some are still scared. The little ones cry at night. That's why Gray Bear is holding a special ceremony tonight, Emmett explained, to help chase away the bad dreams. Will it work? Jacob asked skeptically. It might. Emmett answered honestly. And even if it doesn't chase away all the dreams, being together, knowing you're all safe, that helps too. Jacob considered this, then nodded seriously. I'll tell the others, so they won't be afraid. Abigail and Emmett exchanged a glance over the boy's head, proud, concerned, wondering at the resilience of a child who, despite his own trauma, thought first of comforting others. Throughout the day, preparations for departure continued. Warriors packed supplies and prepared horses for the long journey to Helena. Martha and the other women created travel bundles for each child, clean clothing, dried food, small comfort items like carved wooden animals or woven bracelets. Abigail helped where she could, though she rarely let Jacob out of her sight. The boy gradually grew more comfortable exploring the camp, especially when Samuel joined him. The two stayed close together, a bond forged in shared captivity that would not easily break. Emmett divided his time between securing gray writing, detailed reports of everything they'd discovered, and checking on the children. By late afternoon, he sought out Abigail, finding her helping Martha prepare medicinal herbs for the journey. "May I borrow Mrs. Walsh for a moment?" he asked the older woman, who nodded with a knowing smile. Abigail followed him to a quiet spot overlooking the valley where Jacob and Samuel played within sight, but out of earshot, watched over by one of Joseph's young warriors. "There's something I need to discuss with you." Emmett began, his expression serious. "About our journey to Helena." "What is it?" "I've been thinking about your situation. The legal challenges ahead." He hesitated. "There's another option we haven't discussed, one that might be safer for you and Jacob." Abigail tensed. "What option?" "You could stay with the Blackfoot," he said quietly. "Gray Bear has offered sanctuary. His people move between summer and winter camps, rarely venturing into white settlements. You and Jacob would be safe here beyond the reach of territorial law." She stared at him, stunned by the suggestion. "You want us to live as fugitives forever?" "Not forever," he clarified quickly. "Just until I can secure your exoneration, until it's safe to return." "Oh, and how long might that be? Months, years?" She shook her head. "Jacob needs stability, education, a normal life. Is risking his mother's arrest, or worse, the stability he needs?" The question hit its mark. Abigail turned away, watching her son play with a lightness she hadn't seen since their reunion. "And what of you?" she asked softly. "Would you simply leave us here and return to your Pinkerton duties?" Something flickered in Emmett's eyes, uncertainty perhaps, or a deeper emotion he wasn't ready to name. "I would do whatever necessary to ensure your safety and Jacob's. If that meant leaving you here temporarily while I fought for your exoneration, then yes. And if it couldn't be obtained, if months stretched into years," he met her gaze steadily, "then I would return, as often as possible." The unspoken implication hung between them that what had begun as obligation had become something neither had anticipated, something neither was quite ready to acknowledge aloud. "I can't hide forever," Abigail said finally. "Running from the law, living in fear of discovery, that's no life for Jacob. Or for me." Her chin lifted with the quiet determination Emmett had come to admire. "I'll take my chances with justice." He nodded, respect evident in his expression. "Then we face it together." The moment was interrupted by Samuel's excited shout as he and Jacob discovered something interesting in the grass, a small lizard which they carefully transported in cupped hands to show the adults. "Look, Mother!" Jacob exclaimed, his green eyes alight with childlike wonder that somehow miraculously had survived his ordeal. "It changes color when you hold it." Abigail crouched to admire the tiny creature, her smile bright enough to rival the afternoon sun. In that moment, watching mother and son share this simple joy, Emmett knew with bone-deep certainty that he would do whatever necessary to protect their newfound happiness, even if it meant risking everything he'd built in his career and life. Some debts, he realized, transcended obligation. Some connections defied rational explanation. And sometimes a man simply recognized home when he found it, even in the most unexpected circumstances. As dusk approached, the Blackfoot camp transformed. The central fire grew large and fed by sweet-smelling pine and cedar. Around it, logs were arranged in a circle where the children would sit for the healing ceremony. Gray Bear emerged from his tent wearing ceremonial garments, a fringed buckskin shirt adorned with porcupine quills, eagle feathers in his silver hair, his face painted with ochre and white clay in sacred patterns. The rescued children gathered slowly, some clinging to their newfound protectors, others moving with the confidence of those beginning to believe in safety again. Jacob stayed close to Abigail, but his eyes were curious rather than fearful as he watched the preparations. "What will happen?" he whispered. "A ceremony to help chase away bad memories," she explained, settling him on her lap as they took their place in the circle, "to make room for good ones." Emmett sat beside them, his solid presence a comfort to both. Around the fire, warriors and women began to sing a low, rhythmic chant that seemed to vibrate in the bones and quiet the mind. Gray Bear moved around the circle, touching each child's forehead with a mixture of sacred herbs and speaking soft words of blessing. When he reached Jacob, the old chief paused, studying the boy with kind eyes. "You carried others' burdens," he said in careful English. "A heavy weight for small shoulders." Jacob nodded solemnly. "I had to help the little ones. They were scared." "A brave heart," Gray Bear approved, marking Jacob's forehead with the herbal mixture. "But now you must let others be strong for you, your mother, your friend." His gaze flickered briefly to Emmett. This is how the circle of life remains unbroken. As the ceremony continued, drums joined the singing. Children were encouraged to speak of their fears, to name the shadows that haunted their dreams, so that the fire might consume them. Some were too traumatized to speak. Others shared in halting words or tears. Jacob, after long hesitation, stood and spoke in a small but clear voice. I'm afraid they'll come back, he said, looking at the ground. The men with masks. I'm afraid they'll take me away again. His voice broke. I'm afraid I'll forget Mother again. Abigail's heart contracted painfully, but Graybear nodded with understanding. The fear has a name now, he told Jacob, and named fears lose their power. He handed the boy a small bundle of herbs. Cast it into the fire. Watch your fear burn. Jacob did as instructed, watching wide-eyed as the bundle flared bright in the flames. Around the circle, other children followed suit, some crying, some silent, but each participating in this ritual of release. When all had taken their turn, Graybear raised his arms to the star-filled sky. The spirits have heard. They will stand guard over your dreams tonight. The ceremony concluded with food shared around the fire, a simple feast to celebrate freedom and survival. Children who had been withdrawn throughout the day now laughed, some even playing games taught by the Blackfoot children. The transformation wasn't complete. Trauma's shadows wouldn't disappear in a single night, but a beginning had been made. Later, as the camp settled for sleep, Abigail tucked Jacob into their tent. The boy was exhausted but calm, his eyes heavy-lidded as she sang a soft lullaby from his infancy. Will the ceremony really help? He asked drowsily. I think it might, she replied, smoothing his hair. But if the bad dreams come anyway, I'll be right here. And Emmett, too. The question caught her by surprise. He has his own tent, love. Jacob frowned slightly. But he's your husband now. Martha said so. Abigail hesitated, unsure how to explain the complicated arrangement to a 6-year-old. It's not a real marriage, Jacob. Emmett helped me so I could find you. He's our friend. Oh, Jacob considered this, eyelids drooping. But he could be real, if you wanted. Before she could formulate a response, he had drifted into sleep, leaving her to ponder his innocent observation. Children saw with unclouded eyes. She reflected, perceiving connections and possibilities that adults often complicated with doubt and fear. Outside the tent, she found Emmett standing watch, his tall figure silhouetted against the dying fire. He turned at her approach, moonlight catching the silver in his beard and the concern in his eyes. Jacob asleep? He asked softly. She nodded. The ceremony seemed to help. He's calmer tonight. Graybear has wisdom our doctors could learn from. Emmett gestured toward the surrounding camp. Most of the children are sleeping peacefully for the first time since their rescue, including the man who orchestrated their suffering. Abigail noted, glancing toward the guarded tent where Sebastian Gray was held. Emmett's expression hardened. Gray sleeps because he believes he'll eventually escape justice, that his connections will protect him. Will they bomb? Not this time. His voice held absolute certainty. Too many children have suffered. Too many families destroyed. Whatever happens in Helena, Gray will face reckoning for his crimes. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching the stars wheel overhead. The night was clear and cold, the moon casting the mountainscape in silver and shadow. Jacob asked if you would stay in our tent tonight. Abigail said finally, her voice carefully neutral. He seems to have decided you belong with us. Something flickered in Emmett's eyes, surprise followed by a warmer emotion he quickly masked. Children see the world simply, he observed. They see truth where adults see complications, she countered softly. The implication hung between them, neither quite ready to grasp it fully. After a moment, Emmett cleared his throat. If my presence would comfort the boy, I'm happy to oblige. I can sleep just inside the entrance. Abigail nodded, relieved and perhaps a touch disappointed by his proper response. Thank you. We both feel safer with you near. As they turned toward the tent, a shout shattered the night's peace, one of the guards calling alarm. Emmett's hand went immediately to his revolver as warriors emerged from their tents, weapons ready. Stay with Jacob, he instructed Abigail, already moving toward the commotion at the camp's edge. She hesitated only briefly before following, unwilling to be separated from Emmett if danger threatened. Jacob was sleeping soundly. Martha's tent was next to theirs, and the older woman would hear if he woke. At the camp's perimeter, warriors had surrounded a lone figure who knelt with hands raised in surrender, a white man trail-worn and exhausted. Emmett pushed through the circle, revolver trained on the stranger. Identify yourself, he demanded. The man looked up, the relief washing over his haggard features. Joshua Hill, Pinkerton Agency, thank God. He struggled to his feet. I've been tracking you for days, Walsh. Helena office received your telegraph from that trading post last month. Sent me to provide backup. Emmett lowered his weapon, recognition replacing suspicion. Hill, I thought you were in Wyoming. Was until your message about Sebastian Gray came through. Hill's gaze swept the camp, noting the rescued children peering curiously from tent entrances. Looks like I missed the action. Not all of it, Emmett replied grimly. We have Gray in custody, but his network remains active. Judge Holloway in Granite Falls, Reverend Caldwell, they're part of it. Hill whistled low. Corruption that high up. No wonder this operation has been so difficult to crack. He glanced at Abigail, who stood slightly behind Emmett. And this would be my wife, Emmett said without hesitation. Abigail Walsh. If Hill was surprised by this information, he concealed it well. Ma'am, he acknowledged with a respectful nod. Any woman who'd marry this stubborn son of a gun must be exceptional indeed. The tension eased as Emmett introduced Hill to Joseph and explained his presence to the suspicious warriors. The Pinkerton agent was escorted to Gray Bear's tent where he could rest and be briefed on recent events. As they walked back to their own tent, Abigail gave Emmett a questioning look. You didn't explain our arrangement. Hill doesn't need to know the details, he replied simply. Legally, you are my wife. That's all that matters for now. Something in his tone made her study him more closely. And after When We Rage Helena, when Gray faces justice, Emmett stopped turning to face her fully in the moonlight. After depends on many things, Abigail. On whether we can prove your innocence. On what you and Jacob need. He hesitated, then added quietly, on what you want. The unspoken question hung between them, too fragile yet for direct acknowledgement. Abigail looked away, first her response equally indirect. Jacob has taken to you, she observed. He's never known a kind man in his life. Daniel was... She shook her head, banishing painful memories. You've been good for him. For us both. He's a remarkable boy, Emmett said. Strong like his mother. They had reached their tent. Inside, Jacob slept peacefully, his small face relaxed in a way it rarely was while awake. Abigail settled beside him, stroking his hair with gentle fingers. Emmett arranged his bedroll near the entrance, maintaining propriety while fulfilling his promise to stay close. As the camp quieted again, Abigail's voice came soft in the darkness. Thank you for everything. Emmett's reply was equally soft but carried the weight of certainty. Whatever comes in Helena, Abigail, you won't face it alone. I promise you that. It wasn't quite a declaration. Not yet. But in the quiet of a Blackfoot tent high in the Montana mountains, it was enough of foundation being laid stone by careful stone for whatever future might await them in the world below. They departed the Blackfoot camp at dawn, a procession unlike any seen in the Montana Territory. 27 children, 2 had been claimed by Blackfoot families who recognized their own traveled on horseback or in wagons fashioned from materials salvaged from Red Snake Gorge. Sebastian Gray rode bound and under heavy guard, his face a mask of contempt that occasionally slipped to reveal the fear beneath. Joseph and 8 warriors accompanied them, while Gray Bear and the rest of the tribe remained in their summer camp. The old chief had blessed each child before departure, offering small medicine pouches for protection on the journey ahead. To Abigail, he had given special counsel. The white man's justice is not always true justice, he warned. Be prepared for battles beyond the ones you see coming. Now as their caravan wound down from the high country toward the plains below, she pondered his words. Jacob rode before her on their shared horse, his small body relaxed against hers in a trust that still seemed miraculous after all he'd endured. Ahead, Emmett and Hill led the procession deep in conversation about the evidence they carried and the legal challenges awaiting them in Helena. Joshua Hill had proven an unexpected ally. His arrival brought not just additional protection, but official sanction for their mission. As a senior Pinkerton operative, his testimony would carry weight with territorial authorities, perhaps enough to counter Judge Holloway's influence. Mother, Jacob's voice drew her from her thoughts. Where will we live when this is over? The question caught her unprepared. I'm not sure yet, love. We'll need to see what happens in Helena first. Could we live with Emmett in his cabin? Abigail hesitated. His cabin burned, remember? The bad men set fire to it. Then we could build a new one, Jacob suggested with a child's simple logic. A bigger one with a room just for me. She smiled despite her concerns touched by his planning. We'll see, Jacob. There are many things to consider. But you like him, the boy persisted. And he likes us, I can tell. Before she could formulate a response, Samuel rode up beside them, his face alight with excitement at being trusted with his own mount. The 2 boys immediately launched into animated conversation, leaving Abigail to her thoughts once more. Did she like Emmett Walsh? The question seemed absurdly simple for the complexity of her feelings. She respected him certainly, trusted him with her life and Jacob's, felt gratitude for his unwavering support. But beyond that, she watched his straight-backed figure riding ahead, remembering how he'd looked at her in the firelight, how his hand had reached for her before falling back, how he spoke of after with a hesitancy that suggested hopes he dared not voice. Yes, she liked him, perhaps more than liked. But such feelings seemed premature, even dangerous with so much uncertainty ahead. Their first night on the trail, they camped in a sheltered valley beside a clear stream. The children, though tired from travel, seemed to draw strength from their progress away from the mountains where they'd suffered. They ate well, played simple games taught by the Blackfoot warriors, and settled to sleep with less fear than before. Gray was kept apart, guarded closely, his hands bound even while he ate. He had spoken little since their departure, but his eyes followed Abigail with malevolent intensity whenever she passed near. After ensuring Jacob was settled comfortably with Samuel and some of the other boys, Abigail joined Emmett, Hill, and Joseph at the main fire to discuss their journey. 2 more days to Helena if the weather holds. Hill estimated, studying their map. We should reach Miller's trading post by midday tomorrow. We can resupply there and send word ahead to the territorial marshal. Can the marshal be trusted? Joseph asked, his expression skeptical. Marshal Davies is a good man, Emmett assured him. No connection to Holloway or Gray's operation as far as our intelligence shows. Intelligence can be flawed, Abigail pointed out quietly. Sebastian Gray's network has proven more extensive than anyone realized. Hill nodded, acknowledging her concern. True enough, Mrs. Walsh, which is why we'll proceed with caution. Davies will be told only that we're bringing in a high-value prisoner and rescued children. Names and details will wait until we're face-to-face. And once we reach Helena, she pressed. What then? The 3 men exchanged glances before Emmett answered. Gray will be secured in the territorial prison. The children will be housed temporarily at Mercy Hospital while arrangements are made to return them to their families. And those without families. The question revealed her deepest concern, not just for the orphan children among their group, but for her own and Jacob's uncertain future. The Sisters of Charity maintain an orphanage, Hill said, missing the personal nature of her inquiry. It's clean, well run. The children will be safe there until permanent arrangements can be made. Abigail's expression must have revealed her thoughts, for Emmett quickly added, but that won't be necessary for all of them. Some have relatives who can take them in. His eyes met hers, and others have advocates who will ensure their welfare. She understood his unspoken reassurance that he would not allow Jacob to be placed in an orphanage regardless of the legal outcome of her case. Joseph, who had been listening silently, spoke up. And the witch hunter, this Judge Holloway who sells children, what justice awaits him? That's more complicated, Hill admitted. Judges have significant protection under territorial law. We'll need irrefutable evidence linking him directly to Gray's operation. Which we have, Emmett insisted, patting the saddlebag that contained his detailed reports and evidence collected from Red Snake Gorge. Gray's testimony will be crucial, but even without it, there's enough here to raise serious questions about Holloway's conduct. If Gray testifies, Abigail said softly, men like him rarely implicate their powerful allies. He'll talk, Hill said with grim certainty. Once he understands the full extent of the charges against him. Child trafficking carries the death penalty in most territories. His only hope for leniency will be cooperation. The conversation continued into the night, weighing options and anticipating obstacles. Throughout, Abigail remained quiet but attentive, her mind working through contingencies the men might not have considered. Her life and Jacob's hung in the balance of decisions being made around this campfire. She would leave nothing to chance. When the discussion finally wound down, Joseph and Hill retired to their bedrolls, leaving Emmett and Abigail alone by the dying fire. You're troubled, he observed. She stared into the embers. I'm realistic. Holloway has power connections. Even with your evidence, he could twist the narrative. Paint me as the criminal and himself as the upstanding judge who tried to bring me to justice. Not if Gray testifies. A desperate man facing the gallows, his word against a territorial judge. She shook her head. It's a fragile foundation for hope, Emmett. He moved closer, his voice low but intense. Then we build a stronger one. The children's testimony, the physical evidence from the compound, my reputation and Hill's with the Pinkerton Agency. His hand found hers in the firelight. Your truth, Abigail. Spoken without fear. The warmth of his touch anchored her, driving back the cold doubt that had been her companion for so long. I want to believe justice is possible, she whispered. It is. His certainty was absolute. Not always perfect, not always swift, but possible, especially when good people stand together against corruption. She looked up, meeting his gaze directly. And after, if we succeed, what then? The question that had hovered between them for days was finally spoken aloud. Emmett's expression softened, his eyes reflecting the dying firelight. That depends on what you want, Abigail. What you and Jacob need. He hesitated, then continued with careful honesty. I would offer you a home, if you wished it. Protection. Stability for Jacob. His voice dropped even lower. And companionship, if you found that agreeable. It wasn't a declaration of love. They had known each other too briefly, had endured too much upheaval for such certainties. But it was an offer of something equally precious, a future. A foundation upon which other feelings might grow given time and peace. I think, she said slowly, that might be agreeable indeed, to us both. Something eased in Emmett's expression tension he'd carried so long he'd forgotten its weight. Then we have another reason to see justice done in Helena, another future to fight for. She nodded, the simple gesture sealing an understanding between them, more binding than the hasty ceremony that had legally made her his wife. This was a choice freely made by both, a beginning rather than an expedient. A child's cry shattered the moment Jacob caught in another nightmare. Abigail was on her feet instantly, moving toward the tent where the boys slept. Emmett followed a step behind, but steadfastly present as he had been since the day he'd found her caged and condemned. Together they soothed Jacob back to sleep, their quiet reassurances and gentle touches forming a sanctuary around the frightened child. And if Joseph or Hill or any of the others noticed how naturally they moved as a unit, how instinctively they complemented each other's efforts, no one remarked upon it. Some truths needed no acknowledgement beyond the living of them. The trading post appeared shortly after midday, a collection of rough-hewn buildings nestled in a small valley where several trails converged. Miller's establishment served as general store, post office, an unofficial news center for the surrounding territory, a place where information flowed as freely as the whiskey Miller served to weary travelers. Emmett and Hill rode ahead to make arrangements while the main party remained hidden in a grove of cottonwoods half a mile away. Sebastian Gray, now gagged to prevent him calling out, watched their caution with narrowed eyes that missed nothing. "He's planning something," Abigail observed to Joseph as they waited. "I can see it in his face." The Blackfoot warrior nodded grimly. The snake is most dangerous when cornered. When Emmett and Hill returned, their expressions were troubling. "Miller says Holloway's men passed through 3 days ago," Emmett reported. 6 riders heavily armed, asking questions about a red-haired woman and a Pinkerton agent. "They're hunting us," Abigail concluded, her arm tightening around Jacob. "They're hunting blind," Hill corrected. "Miller told them nothing. Said he hasn't seen strangers in weeks." "Can he be trusted?" Joseph asked. "He's no friend to Holloway," Emmett confirmed. "Lost his son to consumption last winter when the judge denied a property claim that would have paid for treatment in Denver." His expression hardened. "Miller's agreed to help. He's sending his own telegram to Marshal Davies in Helena, arranging for a meeting point outside the city." "And supplies?" Abigail asked practically. "Being prepared now. We'll collect them and move on quickly." Emmett's gaze swept over the tired children. "It's not safe to linger." They proceeded with caution, sending only Martha and 2 warriors to collect the supplies Miller had assembled. The old storekeeper watched from his porch as they departed, his weathered face revealing nothing to casual observers, but his eyes conveying understanding of the mission's importance. Back on the trail, they pushed harder, knowing Holloway's men might be anywhere ahead or behind. The children sensed the adults' tension becoming quieter, more watchful. Jacob stayed especially close to Abigail, his earlier excitement about the journey replaced by wariness. "Are the bad men coming?" he asked that evening as they made camp in a defensible position suggested by Joseph. Abigail considered lying to soothe him, then thought better of it. "Some men might try to stop us from reaching Helena," she explained carefully. "But Emmett and Joseph and the warriors won't let them hurt us." Jacob digested this, his young face solemn. "Because of me, because I escaped." "No, love." She gathered him close. "Because Judge Holloway and the others have done many wrong things. They're afraid of being punished." "Like the doctor," Jacob's voice quavered on the name. "Yes, like him." She stroked his hair, wishing she could shield him from these harsh realities. "But justice will find them all, Jacob, I promise you that." Whether she could keep that promise remained to be seen, but the conviction in her voice seemed to reassure him. He nestled against her, slowly relaxing into sleep, despite the hushed activity around their camp, as extra guards were posted and weapons checked. Later, Abigail joined the strategy discussion around the main fire. Gray had been secured in a makeshift shelter guarded by 2 warriors who would allow him neither speech nor movement beyond absolute necessity. The children slept under Martha's watchful care, their dreams for once seemingly peaceful. "Miller's information confirms what we suspected," Hill was saying. "Holloway knows Gray has been captured. He's mobilizing resources to prevent him reaching Helena and testifying." "Can the marshal provide protection once we reach territorial jurisdiction?" Abigail asked. "If Miller's telegram got through, yes," Emmett replied. "Davies will meet us with deputies at Elk Creek, a day's ride from Helena. From there, we'll have official escort." "Holloway will have anticipated this," Joseph pointed out. "If he means to strike, it will be before we reach Elk Creek." Hill nodded grimly. "Which is why we need to change our route. Take the North Passage through Blackwater Canyon instead of the main trail." "Blackwater is treacherous," Emmett objected. "Arrow trails, poor visibility. If we're ambushed there—" "We won't be," Joseph interrupted, "because no white man uses that trail. It's known only to my people and a few trusted trappers." A tense silence followed as they considered the options. The main trail was faster, but exposed them to potential ambush by Holloway's men. Blackwater Canyon offered secrecy, but would slow their progress significantly, and its difficult terrain would be hard on the already exhausted children. What about splitting up? Abigail suggested. Suddenly, all eyes turned to her. Most of our party continues on the main trail as a decoy Joseph some warriors' children strong enough to maintain good pace. Meanwhile, a smaller group takes Gray Jacob and the most vulnerable children through Blackwater Canyon. Hill looked skeptical. Dividing our strength is risky. So is presenting a single target, she countered. Holloway's men will expect us to stay together to follow the most direct route to Helena. We use that expectation against them. Emmett studied her with something like admiration. It could work. The decoy group would draw pursuit away from those most at risk. I will lead the main party, Joseph offered immediately, with 4 warriors. Enough to seem like the full group from a distance, especially if we arrange blankets on horses to appear as riders. And I'll take Gray and the smaller children through the canyon, Emmett decided, with Hill Abigail and 2 warriors as guard. The plan took shape quickly after that, which children would go with each group, what supplies would be needed, signals to be used if danger threatened either party. By the time they retired for the night, all was arranged for an early departure. Abigail checked on Jacob one last time before seeking her own rest. The boy slept soundly, one arm flung over Samuel, who would be traveling with Joseph's group while Jacob remained with her. The separation would be difficult for the friends, but safety demanded it. She found Emmett standing a watch at the camp's edge, his tall figure silhouetted against the star-filled sky. You should sleep, she said softly, joining him. Tomorrow will be demanding. As should you, he returned with a small smile. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, each lost in thoughts of the difficult journey ahead. Your strategy was sound, Emmett said finally. Splitting our forces. It wasn't what I'd have suggested, but it makes tactical sense. I had a good teacher, she replied, a field surgeon who once explained how to triage wounded soldiers when resources were limited. Focus protection on those with the best chance of survival while ensuring the whole doesn't collapse. During the war, when she nodded, he continued thoughtfully, you learned more than medicine in those field hospitals. I learned that survival often depends on making impossible choices. Her gaze drifted toward the shelter where Gray was held, and that justice and vengeance are not always easily distinguished. Emmett studied her profile in the moonlight. Are you seeking justice for Jacob, or vengeance against those who took him? Can it not be both, she asked softly. Does a mother's rage invalidate her righteous cause? No, he acknowledged, but rage can blind, can lead to mistakes when clear vision is most needed. She turned to face him fully. You fear I might take matters into my own hands with Gray, that I might deny him the trial you believe he deserves. The thought had occurred, he admitted. Your restraint thus far has been remarkable given what he's done. I want him to face justice, Abigail said firmly. True justice before witnesses, his crimes exposed for all to see. A quick death at my hands would be too merciful. Her expression hardened. Let him hang slowly, Emmett. Let him know fear and helplessness as the children did. The vehemence in her voice didn't disturb him. He understood it too well. He'd seen too many criminals escape punishment through technicalities or corruption to fault her desire for absolute justice. He will face trial, Emmett promised, and he will hang, for Jacob and every child who suffered at his hands. She nodded, accepting his word. After a moment, she spoke again, her voice softer. When this is over, when justice is done, I would like to plant a garden. The abrupt change of subject startled him. A garden? Yes, with vegetables and herbs, but flowers too. Jacob loves sunflowers. A faint smile touched her lips. I've spent so long surviving Emmett, so long moving from one crisis to another. I want to grow things again. Watch seasons change. Give Jacob the stability of seeing seeds become plants, become food on our table. The simple yearning in her voice moved him deeply. This woman who had endured so much abuse, loss, false accusation, imprisonment, dreamed not of wealth or status or even revenge, but of the quiet miracle of growing things, of providing continuity for her son. You shall have your garden, he said with quiet certainty. Wherever we settle, however this journey ends, I promise you that. She looked up at him, moonlight silvering her features and reflecting in her remarkable eyes. Careful Emmett Walsh, a woman could build a future on promises like that. I hope she will, he replied simply. The moment stretched between them, fragile and precious. Then with a practicality that had helped her survive so much, Abigail stepped back. We should rest, she said. Dawn comes early. He nodded, understanding that some possibilities were best left unexamined until current dangers were past. Good night, Abigail. Good night, Emmett. She moved away toward her tent but paused once to look back at him, a glance that carried more meaning than words could have conveyed. Then she disappeared into the darkness, leaving Emmett to his watch and the stars that wheeled overhead, bearing silent witness to promises made in the Montana night. They separated at first light, Joseph leading his larger party east along the main trail, while Emmett guided the smaller group north toward Blackwater Canyon. The children had been prepared for the division, but still many tears were shed as friends said uncertain goodbyes. I'll see you in Helena, Samuel assured Jacob, trying to sound brave though his voice wavered. Just a few days, then we'll have real beds and hot food. Jacob nodded solemnly. Be careful. Watch for the men with guns. The boys embraced briefly before being led to their respective groups. Abigail, watching from horseback with Jacob now seated before her, felt her heart twist at their premature understanding of danger and loss. Their reduced party consisted of Emmett Hill, Abigail, Jacob, 5 of the youngest or most traumatized children, 2 Blackfoot warriors, Martha and heavily guarded Sebastian Gray. They traveled light, carrying only essential supplies and weapons. The journey to Blackwater Canyon took most of the morning over increasingly difficult terrain. When they finally reached the canyon's entrance, a narrow cleft between towering rock walls, Emmett called a brief halt to rest the horses and study the path ahead. Single file from here, he instructed. Stay close, watch your footing. The trail narrows considerably in places. Gray, who had maintained sullen silence throughout the journey, suddenly spoke. You're fools if you think this will end in Helena, he said, his voice rough from disuse. Holloway has men everywhere. The governor's office, the marshal's service, even the territorial prison. Trying to frighten us won't help your situation, Hill informed him coldly. Gray's smile was chilling. Not trying to frighten, just stating facts. The operation is bigger than you know, reaches higher than you can imagine. His gaze shifted to Abigail. Your boy was lucky. Others went to places you couldn't conceive. Emmett stepped between them, blocking Gray from her sight. Enough. Save your confessions for the territorial prosecutor. They proceeded into the canyon, the path so narrow in places that they had to dismount and lead the horses single file. Sheer rock walls rose hundreds of feet on either side, reducing midday to twilight in the depths below. The children, already weary, grew increasingly fearful in the shadowed confines. It's like the cave, one little girl whispered, clutching Martha's hand. Where they put us when we were bad. Abigail's jaw tightened at this casual revelation of yet another cruelty inflicted on these innocent victims. It's not a cave, she assured the child gently. Look up. You can see the sky blue and wide. No one will hurt you here. Progress was slow, each mile hard-won against the canyon's challenges. By late afternoon, they had covered perhaps half the distance to the other side. Emmett called another halt in a small clearing where the canyon briefly widened, allowing them to rest and water the horses at a tiny spring. We'll push on until dusk, he decided after consulting with Hill. Try to clear the canyon before making camp. The warriors who had been scouting ahead returned with concerning news. Rockfall blocks the trail 2 miles ahead, one reported. Recent, not natural. Emmett's expression darkened. How recent? Hours, not days. Hill drew Emmett aside, lowering his voice. If Holloway's men know about this trail after all, then we could be walking into a trap, Emmett finished grimly, but turning back means losing a day we can't afford to lose. Abigail joined them, having overheard. What about climbing out? The walls looked steep, but not impossible at this point. The warriors shook their heads. Too difficult for the children, one explained, and for him. He jerked his chin toward Gray, who sat bound and guarded nearby. We press forward, Emmett decided finally, but with extreme caution. Hill, you take point with one warrior. I'll bring up the rear with the other. Abigail, Martha, and the children stay in the middle. Gray remained secured to his horse, no exceptions. They resumed their journey, tension now palpable among the adults. The children, sensing the change, grew quieter, huddling closer together as they walked or rode. Jacob, still mounted with Abigail, kept scanning the canyon walls as if expecting danger to materialize from the very rock. They reached the rockfall as dusk approached, a jumble of boulders and stones that completely blocked the narrow trail. It looked natural enough to the untrained eye, but Emmett and the warriors immediately noted signs that it had been deliberately created. Recent tool marks, one warrior observed, pointing to fresh scratches on larger rocks. Men worked from above. Hill studied the canyon walls, rifle ready. Could be watching us now. We need to clear enough space to pass, Emmett said, dismounting. Quickly before we lose the light completely. They set to work moving smaller rocks while assessing which larger ones could be safely shifted without causing further collapse. The children were gathered in the most protected spot available, with Martha and Abigail standing guard. Jacob tugged at his mother's skirt, his voice a frightened whisper. Mother, there's a man up there. Abigail followed his pointing finger to a shadowed ledge high on the canyon wall. For a moment, she saw nothing. Then a slight movement caught her eye, the unmistakable glint of sunlight on a rifle barrel. "Emmett," she called sharply. "Above us!" Her warning came just as the first shot rang out, echoing deafeningly in the confined space. The bullet struck rock near where Emmett had been working, sending fragments flying. "Take cover!" he shouted, diving behind a boulder and drawing his revolver. Chaos erupted as more shots followed from multiple positions along the canyon rim. Abigail threw herself over Jacob and the nearest children, using her body as a shield while scanning desperately for better shelter. The Blackfoot warriors returned fire, their rifles cracking in the gathering darkness. Hill had taken position behind an outcropping, methodically targeting muzzle flashes above. "The spring," Emmett called to Abigail. "Get the children to the spring." She understood immediately the small water source they'd passed was protected by an overhang that would shield them from fire from above. Gathering the terrified children, she and Martha half dragged, half carried them back down the trail toward relative safety. In the confusion, Sebastian Gray saw opportunity. With his guards distracted by the ambush, he rolled from his horse and began working his bound hands beneath him, contorting until they were in front of his body. Then, keeping low, he scuttled toward the rock wall where shadows would conceal his movements. Jacob, glancing back, was the only one who saw him. "Mother, the doctor's getting away." Abigail turned sharply, caught between the imperative to protect the children and the urgent need to prevent Gray's escape. The decision was made instantly. "Martha, take them to the spring. Stay there until someone comes for you." She pressed Jacob into the older woman's arms. "Go." "Mother, no," Jacob cried, struggling to reach her. "I'll be right behind you," she promised, though uncertainty made her voice catch. "Go with Martha now, please, Jacob." The desperation in her tone penetrated his panic. He stopped struggling, though tears streamed down his face as Martha hurried him and the other children toward the spring. Abigail turned back, scanning the shadowed canyon floor for Gray. Movement near a fissure in the rock wall caught her attention, Gray working his way toward what appeared to be a narrow side passage. Without hesitation, she pursued, staying low to avoid bullets still flying overhead. The fissure, when she reached it, proved to be the entrance to a small cave that angled upward into the canyon wall. Gray's footprints were clearly visible in the dusty floor. Drawing the knife she'd carried since their rescue mission, Abigail followed rage and determination, overriding caution. This man had orchestrated Jacob's suffering, had trafficked in children's lives and innocence. She would not allow him to escape justice. The cave narrowed as it climbed, forcing her to crouch. Ahead, she could hear Gray's labored breathing as he struggled upward with bound hands. The sounds of gunfire grew fainter behind them, muffled by rock. "There's nowhere to go, Doctor," she called, her voice echoing strangely in the confined space. "This passage will only lead you back to the canyon rim, where Holloway's men are shooting at everyone, including you." Gray's laugh floated back to her. "You think this is Holloway? Use your brain, woman. Why would the judge risk sending men after us when he could simply have us arrested in Helena? No, these are competitors, rivals from the Eastern operation who don't want me talking to authorities." The information startled her, but Abigail pressed on. "It doesn't matter who they are. You're not escaping. I already have." The confidence in his voice sent a chill through her. "This passage connects to a network of caves. I've used them before. My associates know them well." Abigail rounded a sharp bend and found herself in a larger chamber where the passage forked. Gray stood at the junction, his back to one wall, his bound hands raised before him defensively. Despite his bravado, fear showed clearly in his eyes as she approached, knife ready. "Your reign of terror ends here," she said quietly. "One way or another. If you kill me, you'll never learn the full extent of the operation," he countered desperately. "Never know which children went where. Never be able to dismantle the network. You'll tell us everything before you hang." "I will tell you one thing now," Gray said, his voice suddenly calm despite his precarious position. "About your son, about what was planned for him." Abigail's step faltered. "What about Jacob? He wasn't selected at random, you know. Daniel Blackwood offered him specifically. Said the boy had a rare quality intelligence coupled with physical resilience. Perfect for training." "Training for what?" The question escaped before she could stop herself. Gray's smile was hideous in the dim light filtering from above. "For replacement. The operation always needs new blood. Boys who can be molded, shaped to continue the work when men like me are gone." He leaned forward slightly. "Your son was to be my protege, my successor." Horror and revulsion washed through Abigail. "You're lying." "Am I? Ask him about the special lessons. Ask what he was promised if he performed well." Gray's voice dropped to a confidential murmur. "Some children resist completely, others break entirely. But the special ones, the rare ones, they adapt. They survive by becoming what we need them to be. Jacob would never. Every child has a breaking point, Gray interrupted coldly. Even the strongest. It's simply a matter of finding it and applying the right pressure. Rage blinded Abigail momentarily. She lunged forward, knife raised only to stumble as loose rocks shifted beneath her feet. Grace seized the opportunity, shoving past her toward the passage she'd entered from. She recovered quickly, spinning to pursue him, but froze at his next words. He called for, you know, every night at first. Mother help me, mother save me. Then less often, then not at all. Gray's voice echoed from the passage. By the end, he wouldn't even say your name. That's how thoroughly we erased you. With a cry of pure fury, Abigail charged after him, all caution abandoned. She caught him just as he reached the narrowest part of the passage, tackling him to the rocky ground with strength born of maternal rage. They struggled in the confined space, Gray's bound hands a disadvantage, but his larger size still a threat. He managed to roll, pinning her briefly before she drove her knee into his stomach, forcing him off her. He's mine now. Gray gasped, still trying to provoke her even as he fought. Whatever you think you've rescued isn't the son you lost. We made sure of that. You're wrong, Abigail snarled, slashing with her knife and catching his arm. Jacob knows who he is, who I am. For now, Gray agreed, backing away from her blade. But the seeds we planted remain. The nightmares, the training, the things he saw and did to survive. Enough. She lunged again this time, catching him across the chest with the knife. Gray staggered back, gasping, then smiled through bloodied teeth. Too late, he wheezed. They're already here. Before she could make sense of his words, new sounds reached them. Voices, footsteps from the chamber they'd just left. Men's voices, rough and urgent, speaking in a language she didn't recognize. Gray called out to them in the same tongue, his tone commanding, despite his injuries. The voices responded, drawing closer. Abigail retreated, realizing she was about to be trapped between Gray and whoever had entered the cave system from above, likely the same men who had ambushed their party in the canyon. She turned to flee back toward the canyon floor, but Gray's hand shot out, grabbing her ankle. She kicked free, but the delay was costly. A hulking figure appeared in the passage behind Gray, a man in dark clothing with a distinctive snake tattoo visible on his neck. Kill her, Gray ordered in English. Then get me out of here. The man drew a revolver, but Abigail was already moving, darting into a side passage she'd noticed during their struggle. It was narrower than the main route, forcing her to crouch almost double as she fled deeper into the cave system. Behind her, she heard pursuit boots on stone, angry voices, a shot that ricocheted wildly off the rock walls. The passage twisted and turned, sometimes so tight she had to squeeze through, sometimes opening into small chambers with multiple exits. She chose her path instinctively, always moving downward when possible, reasoning that eventually she must find a way back to the canyon floor. After what seemed an eternity of frantic flight, she caught a glimpse of starlight ahead, a small opening in the cave wall. Emerging cautiously, Abigail found herself on a narrow ledge about 15 feet above the canyon floor. Below, the battle appeared to have ended. Bodies lay motionless among the rocks. Of Emmett Hill and the others, she saw no sign. Had they been killed, captured, or had they managed to retreat with the children to safety? Uncertainty paralyzed her momentarily until a sound from inside the cave spurred her into action. Her pursuers were still coming. The ledge was too high for a safe jump, but a series of rocky protrusions might serve as handholds for a controlled descent. With no time to second-guess, Abigail sheathed her knife and began climbing down, her tall frame and farm-strengthened muscles making the task possible, if not easy. She had nearly reached the ground when a shot rang out from above. Pain exploded in her left shoulder as the bullet struck, causing her to lose her grip and fall the remaining distance. She landed hard, the impact driving the breath from her lungs and sending waves of agony through her injured shoulder. For a moment, she lay stunned, fighting to remain conscious. Then survival instinct took over. Rolling to her right side, she staggered to her feet and began moving away from the cave entrance, seeking cover among the boulders strewn across the canyon floor. Blood soaked her sleeve, hot and sticky, but she forced herself to keep moving. She had to find Emmett, Jacob, the others, had to warn them about Gray's escape and the men who had aided him. A flicker of movement caught her eye, a figure detaching from shadow near the rockfall. She tensed, reaching for her knife with her good arm, then nearly collapsed with relief when she recognized Emmett's familiar silhouette. Abigail! He ran to her, catching her as her strength finally faltered. My God, you're hit. Gray, she gasped, escaped. Men in the caves helped him. Emmett's expression hardened as he examined her wound. Through and through, he assessed. Bleeding's not too bad. Can you walk if I support you? She nodded, gritting her teeth against the pain. Jacob, the children. Safe. Martha got them to the spring. Hill's with them now. He helped her toward cover, keeping a wary eye on the ledge from which she'd descended. The warriors, I don't know, I didn't see. Her vision swam as blood loss and shock began to take their toll. How many attackers? At least 6, we got 3. The others retreated when the warriors flanked them. Emmett's arm tightened around her waist as she stumbled. Stay with me, Abigail. We're almost there. The small overhang protecting the spring came into view, and with it, the most beautiful sight Abigail could imagine, Jacob rushing toward her, with Martha calling futilely for him to wait. Mother, he cried, his face a mask of fear and relief. You're hurt. It's not serious, love, she assured him, though the edges of her vision were growing dark. Just a scratch. Emmett guided her to the spring where Hill had already prepared a makeshift camp. The other children huddled together wide-eyed and terrified but unhurt. One warrior sat nearby, binding a wound on his leg. Of the second, there was no sign. Whitehawk, Emmett asked tersely. The injured warrior shook his head. He follows the attackers. Will return when he can. Martha took charge of Abigail's wound cleaning and bandaging it with practiced efficiency while Emmett and Hill conferred quietly. Jacob refused to leave his mother's side, his small face set in determined lines as he helped Martha by holding bandages and fetching water. Grace said things, Abigail told Emmett when he returned to check on her. About the men who attacked us, he claimed they weren't Holloways, said they were rivals from an Eastern operation. Emmett nodded grimly. That matches what we found on the bodies. Not local men, Eastern accents, city clothes beneath the trail gear. And this. He held up a small metal disc on a chain, a medallion stamped with a strange symbol. Hill recognizes it, a calling card of sorts for an organization based in Chicago. Then we're caught between 2 enemies, Abigail realized. Holloway's men still hunting us on the main trail and now these others. We need to move, Hill interjected. If Gray reaches his associates, they'll return in force, and we're too exposed here. Abigail needs rest, Martha protested. The children too. Emmett's expression was torn between compassion and tactical necessity. We can't stay, Martha, not even until morning. Once Whitehawk returns, we press on. The warrior in question appeared as if summoned by his name materializing from the shadows with the silent skill of his people. His report was concise. The attackers had withdrawn up canyon with Gray, but would likely circle back by morning. The passage ahead remained partially blocked, but could be cleared enough for their party to squeeze through with effort. Then that's our path, Emmett decided. We clear the rockfall, continue through the canyon, and make for Elk Creek with all possible speed. Marshal Davies should be waiting there with deputies per our arrangement. If Miller's telegram reached him, Hill cautioned, if Holloway hasn't intercepted it. We have no choice but to proceed as planned, Emmett replied. Unless you have a better suggestion. Hill didn't, nor did anyone else. With grim determination, they prepared to move out, gathering the exhausted children and salvaging what supplies remained after the attack. Abigail insisted on riding despite Martha's concerns about her wound. I'll not slow us down, she said firmly, allowing Emmett to help her mount. Jacob was placed before her, his small body a comfort against her uninjured side. Grace said things about Jacob, she told Emmett quietly as the others prepared to depart. Terrible things, about their plans for him, about how they were training him, changing him. Emmett's expression darkened. Gray is a manipulator. He said whatever he thought would hurt you most. But what if some of it was true? What if Jacob was? She couldn't bring herself to finish the thought. Look at him, Emmett said, gently nodding toward the boy, who sat straight-backed in the saddle, determined to be brave for his injured mother. Whatever they tried to do to him, they failed. He's still Jacob, still your son. Whatever shadows Gray left in his mind will help him fight them. The simple certainty in his voice steadied her. We, she repeated softly. You said we'll help him. Yes, Emmett confirmed, meeting her gaze directly. We will. Together. In that moment, as they prepared to face the dangers still ahead, Abigail felt something settle within her, a certainty that had been building since the day Emmett Walsh had appeared outside her cage. Whatever the future held, whatever justice or injustice awaited them in Helena, they would face it as a unit. Not just as legal husband and wife, but as something forged in the crucible of shared purpose and growing affection. A family, perhaps, different from what she'd had before, built on choice rather than blood or convention. But no less real for that difference. Together, she agreed, her voice stronger than she'd expected, given her injury and exhaustion. Then let's finish this journey. Emmett's hand briefly covered hers on the reins, warm and steady. Then he mounted his own horse and gave the signal to move out. Their small party proceeded into the deepening night, leaving behind 3 dead attackers and blood-stained rocks as mute testimony to the battle fought there. Ahead lay more dangers, more challenges, but also perhaps the justice they had sought for so long. And beyond that justice, a future yet to be written. A garden waiting to be planted, a home waiting to be built, seeds of hope taking root in the most unlikely of soils. Yeah. 3 days later, they reached Helena. The journey had been arduous, clearing the rockfall and darkness, navigating the remainder of Blackwater Canyon, then making a forced march across open country to reach Elk Creek. Marshal Davies had indeed been waiting with 6 deputies, having received Miller's telegram and recognized its urgency. The marshal's escort had proven invaluable when just hours from Helena, they'd encountered a party of riders led by none other than Judge Holloway himself. The judge had been traveling under the pretense of circuit court business, but the heavily armed men accompanying him suggested a different purpose. Faced with territorial lawmen and official Pinkerton credentials, Holloway had been forced to withdraw, though not before fixing Abigail with a look of such hatred it had chilled her blood. The message was clear: this wasn't over. Now, as their exhausted party entered Helena's main street, curious townsfolk emerged from shops and homes to watch the procession. Word had spread quickly: rescued children, captured criminals, Pinkerton agents returning triumphant. Abigail, her wounded shoulder properly treated by the town doctor who had ridden out to meet them, felt a complex mixture of emotions as they approached the territorial courthouse. Relief at having reached relative safety, anxiety about the legal battles ahead, concern for Jacob, who had grown increasingly withdrawn as they neared civilization, and beneath it all a fierce determination that justice would be served not just for her son, but for every child who had suffered at the hands of Sebastian Gray and his associates. "Ready?" Emmett asked quietly, riding beside her. She nodded, straightening in the saddle despite her fatigue and pain. "Ready." Together they rode into Helena to face whatever awaited them, secure in the knowledge that whatever happened next, they would face it as they had faced the dangers of their journey. Together.